Chapter 689. The courtyard in the alley of the Northern Military Department was already beginning to look like it did in the past. The hole under the courtyard wall had been dug very deep, but the crabapple tree had still not been brought over. To find an identical crabapple tree was not an easy task, even for the government of the department for purging officials, whose power could overturn all levels of society. Zhou Tong was well aware of this point, so he was not the least bit dissatisfied with his subordinates, especially when he heard the reports one after another. Assistant Minister Wei did not return. I heard that a great disturbance occurred in the estate last night. Before Lord Huang of the Imperial Astronomer left, he discovered that his clan's carriages had been borrowed to a relative of the madam's clan. They said that they wanted to return to Wuzhou. Tianhai Xingxue has already boarded the carriage, but he was stopped by the guardians of the clan. I heard that an intense conflict broke out between the two. In the end, it was Prime Minister Chen Wu who personally appeared that calmed the situation. There was no sound from the Prince of Xiang's estate, but Prince Chun Lu has not appeared today. According to our analysis, he has probably been imprisoned in the Divine Hall in the back of the estate. From the day before yesterday, when he learned that Chun Changsheng had appeared to restrain Xue Xingchuan, Zhou Tong's complexion had never been good, especially when he heard that the Xue estate was preparing to hold a sacrifice. Although he had always appeared very calm, his subordinates and many people in the palace could see that he was in a terrible mood. Only when he heard this news did his complexion gradually improve, the indifference in his eyes gradually relaxing. No one dared to go to the Xue estate to pay their respects. This was to be expected. The Xue estate's holding of a sacrifice gave many people in the capital an outlet for their emotions, but it also dug a hole. Although it was said to pay respects to Xue Xingchuan, it was actually more like paying respects to the Divine Empress. Today, the imperial court was watching the Xue estate. Who would dare appear there? Qin Changsheng? Zhou Tong suddenly asked. A subordinate replied, "No one from the Orthodox Academy has gone. I didn't expect our little Principal Chun to be so calm and have such a good grasp of propriety." Zhou Tong walked out of the courtyard with his hands behind his back. But it inevitably makes one sigh at the fickleness of the world. That's right, besides me, who could have any true affection for him? The subordinates were all shocked by these words, not understanding why their lord would say this. Zhou Tong paused and turned to the crowd. The entire world knows that he is my only friend. Do you not know? The subordinates saw their lord smile and felt their bodies go cold. How could they possibly answer? On the lakeside of the Tradition Academy, Mao Qiu Yu looked at Chun Changsheng and said, "Now it seems that I was worrying too much. You are much more mature than your peers. So you came here early in the morning and kept looking at me." Chun Changsheng looked at the surface of the lake and said, "But I don't really understand what you mean." Mao Qiu said, "What you did the day before yesterday was already enough. If you do it again, you might overdo it." Chun Changsheng thought for a while and said, "How can I control this? Who makes the rules?" He already knew that no other guests besides Daoist Siyuan and Linghai Zhuang had come to the Xue estate's funeral today. Control and rules originate from a unique will. Mao Qiu looked at him and said, "When His Holiness the Pope was alive, the orthodoxy only had one will, so it could only have one voice. But after His Holiness returned to the Sea of Stars, when Your Holiness succeeded as Pope, Your Holiness was not even 20 years of age. It is very difficult for Your Holiness's will to surpass the orthodoxy. It can only be a coexisting relationship." These words sounded rather vague, but they were actually very clear. Whether the orthodoxy could smoothly pass on its legacy, besides the Pope's will, also depended on the successor's own abilities and methods. Maturity, steadiness, sense of propriety, patience, and sense of responsibility. These were all concrete manifestations of one's abilities and methods. Mao Qiu added, "His Holiness the Pope's health is not very good." Chun Changsheng said, "In a few days, I will go to the Li Palace to see him." Mao Qiu added, "Presumably, His Holiness the Pope will be very gratified." Chun Changsheng fell quiet for a while, then said, "I'm not sure if Marshal Uncle will be happy to see me." Mao Qiu said, "You are gradually learning the relationship between responsibility and silence. This in itself represents growth. Chun Chang Sheng shook his head. In truth, your holiness is wrong. I did not go to the Shui estate today, not because I chose to be silent, because of maturity, not because I saw propriety in my sense of responsibility. It's just that I feel that the fickleness of the world is very common, and it doesn't have much to do with me. Just as you know, I truly am not familiar with Shui Xingchuan. Yes, different from what Zhou Tong thought, different from Mao Qiuyu's gratification, Qin Changshang's not going to the Shui estate had nothing to do with patience or propriety. He just felt that he was not familiar with Shui Xingchuan, so there was no need for him to go. Moreover, he did not know what he should say when Madame Shui or those people were crying in grief. I'm not good at comforting people, he said to Mao Qiuyu. At this moment, Su Mo Yu suddenly walked over. Mao Qiuyu asked what happened. Su Mo Yu bowed, then said to Chun Chang Sheng, Zhou Tong brought people to the Shui estate. Chun Chang Sheng glanced at the sky and asked, what time did the Shui estate set for the soul relocation? Mao Qiuyu's expression turned slightly solemn. If you change your mind because of the actions of others, it is not compatible with your Tao. This was advice and also a warning. Chun Chang Sheng replied, the mind will always change. Only by acknowledging these changes can one be truly obedient. Mao Qiuyu asked, because of what changes? Chun Chang Sheng replied, I am not familiar with Shui Xingchuan, so I will not go to the Shui estate. But I'm very familiar with Zhou Tong, so I should go now. The Shui estate was very deserted, causing the white banner to seem even more lonely and pitiful in the autumn wind. Deserted did not mean that there was not a single person. On the streets and at the ends of the alleys, there were many pairs of eyes gazing from afar at the gate of the Shui estate. Some of them were idlers of the capital who were not afraid of trouble, but even more of them were representatives of the various major powers of the capital. From early morning until now, not a single guest had appeared in front of the Shui estate, not even a few sparrows. The sound of hooves suddenly came from the street, as well as the sound of clothes fluttering in the wind. Several dozen officials and experts of the department for purging officials, as well as an even greater number of redcoat cavalry, escorted Zhou Tong to the Shui estate. In a very short period of time, a dense mass of people had appeared in front of the Shui estate, but there was still no sound, only a deathly stillness. The street was too quiet. One could even faintly hear the crackling of paper threads burning behind the door. Zhou Tong took a white cloth from a subordinate and tied it around his waist, then began to walk into the Shui estate. The steward of the Shui estate, seeing this, wanted to stop him, but he lacked the courage. His legs had long since gone limp. A beautiful woman dressed in mourning clothes stood in front of Zhou Tong and angrily yelled, You actually have the face to come? Zhou Tong looked at her and asked, Madam Wei has returned? He gazed into the cold and cheerless estate and shook his head, sighing, There's no need for this. I've come to light some incense for Brother Shui, so that he won't be too lonely in the sea of stars. The woman's face paled as she yelled, Father would never be willing to see an ungrateful scoundrel like you. The friendship between me and General Shui is not something you women can understand. After saying this, Zhou Tong calmly walked into the Shui estate like he was returning home. In this entire process, he did not even glance at Madame Wei. The officials of the department for purging officials pushed Madame Wei to the side, not letting her come over. Seeing her enemy barge into her estate and thinking that her father's spirit in heaven would assuredly be unable to rest in peace, Madame Wei was filled with grief and indignation, but she was powerless to stop him, so she began to loudly curse. Zhou Tong slightly creased his brow at the incessant stream of curses, somewhat displeased. Your father was a hero of his generation, so how did he raise a shrew like you? A subordinate took out a ball of cloth and stuffed it into Madame Wei's mouth. Chapter 690. Upon arriving at the Shui estate, Zhou Tong's tone of voice was especially like that of a senior, especially when he was lecturing Madame Wei. Standing in the Shui estate, his expression was relaxed, as if he was particularly familiar with this place. This was because he truly had come here many times, like a senior who had just returned from a business trip for many years. In short, It was easy to feel that this was Zhou Tong's home. This made people furious, because everyone knew that the master of the Shui estate had been ruthlessly and shamelessly poisoned to death by him. The housekeeper of the Shui estate angrily took a broom and walked forward, wanted to snatch the young lady from the hands of those officials, but he was ruthlessly kicked to the ground. The servant woman screamed in panic and ran into the estate. The people of the Shui estate rushed over. Seeing the scene, they asked in a trembling voice, "Zhou Tong, just what do you want to do?" Zhou Tong quietly stood in the courtyard, gazing at the green plants in the courtyard. Many memories gradually flashed through his mind, giving rise to many emotions. In truth, he also did not know why he had come here or what he wanted to do. Only when he truly came here did he understand that he truly just wanted to see that person one last time. He turned to Madame Shui and slowly said, "I will burn some incense and then leave." Madame Shui's voice was somewhat trembling, but her expression was exceptionally firm. "You know that this is impossible." Zhou Tong indifferently replied, "This is not something you could decide. The plot from several days ago, the poison in the medicine bowl, the exposed corpse on the official road, all of these matters were related to the Shui estate, and also had nothing to do with it. The people of the Shui estate could not decide their own life or death, their own honor or disgrace. They could only hopelessly accept or wait to be saved. Today, the Shui estate was holding a funeral, but no one dared to come. So who would come to save the helplessness and despair here? "Excuse me." A voice came from outside the door. Zhou Tong's body slightly froze. The officials of the department for purging officials all turned their heads to look behind them, thinking, someone's actually coming? What's the matter with you people? What are you doing blocking someone else's door? A young girl's voice immediately followed. Zhou Tong slowly turned around and narrowed his eyes. He wanted to conceal the true emotions in his heart, and it was also because the scene outside the door was rather dazzling to his eyes. Many young people had come to the street. There were both men and women. Some had intelligent eyes, some were simple and honest, some were proud, some had nervous expressions, but they all shared a common trait. They were all very young, their faces brimming with vitality. Even if he had a myriad of emotions and 100 different temperaments, he still couldn't hide his vitality. This vitality made him feel a little dazzled, and he even felt a faint pain. Perhaps it was because he was already old. In the capital, the Six Ivies were the places with the most youths and vigor. Recently, the situation had been tense. The Six Ivies had closed their gates, with only one exception, the Orthodox Academy. Those youths were students of the Orthodox Academy. Chun Chong Sheng and Su Mo Yu stood at the very front of the crowd. At this sight, the officials of the department for purging officials and the spies on the street representing the various factions were all shocked speechless. Chun Chong Sheng really came. He had come to pay his respects to Shui Xingchuan. He had come to slap the face of Zhou Tong in the imperial court. Chun Chong Sheng walked towards the Shui estate, as if he did not see the officials of the department for purging officials blocking his way. The youths of the Orthodox Academy also followed him forward. Those officials were blocking the entrance of the Shui residence. If it did not give way, the two sides could easily collide. Collision tends to cause friction. The increase in friction would lead to war. The battle escalated to war. Would the situation in Jingdo, which had just calmed down, once again become unstable and uneasy? Zhou Tong said nothing, so the officials of the department for purging officials had no intention of moving aside. The students of the Orthodox Academy also had no intention of stopping, because Chun Chong Sheng was still walking forward. Zhou Tong had not expected that Chun Chong Sheng would suddenly change his mind and come to the Shui estate. But so what if he came? At least half of the secret military power of the great Zhou imperial court was in his hands. This was an extremely terrifying power. Chun Chong Sheng currently had a very high status, but he did not have much power. Just like now, the people standing behind him were just some ordinary students of the Orthodox Academy. Before he ascended to the position of Pope, he could not mobilize the strength of the Orthodoxy. Just how much storm could the Orthodox Academy stir up in the capital? But Zhou Tong's brow creased. What if he had miscalculated? What if there was an accident? What if those princes wanted to move against Chun Chong Sheng? Just when he was thinking these things, the accident had already arrived. The students of the Orthodox Academy and the officials of the department for purging officials met and then collided. What followed was a natural exchange of curses. Clang! The sound of cold sabers being unsheathed was especially clear in front of the Shui estate, like they wanted to cut through the autumn wind. The officials of the department for purging officials did not take the initiative to attack. Some of them unsheathed their sabers, but most of them wanted to intimidate those youths. They did not know that those youths, especially those girls, had been waiting for this chance. Stop, Zhou Tong sternly said. Those youths naturally would not listen to him. Even if the officials of the department for purging officials wanted to listen to him, they had no way of listening to him. Some clear cries resounded through the long street. Countless clear lights crisscrossed in the autumn air, poignant and moving. This was an incomparably pure sword intent and an exquisite combination. The clear and cold sword intent formed an invisible net that scattered towards the officials in front of the Shui estate's gate. Even Zhou Tong himself could only choose to temporarily avoid these sword intents, let alone these officials. Groans rang out one after another as blood spurted out. Some officials of the department for purging officials were slashed by these sword intents until their bodies were covered in blood and they were sent flying. In an instant, the stone lions on both sides of the Shui estate's main gate were dyed red with blood. Some bloody people appeared on the street, creating a bloody scene. No one could stand in front of the Shui estate's gate. A large, open space had appeared. Chun Changsheng walked in. Yi Xiaoyan and her Tensum senior sisters sheathed their swords and returned to stand behind him, following him into the estate. Chun Changsheng walked in front of Zhou Tong. The sounds of metal scraping against metal and the sounds of crossbows being knocked could be heard. The situation was very tense, but Zhou Tong's expression was very calm. He looked at Chun Changsheng and said, "The future pope of my great Zhou dynasty actually needs the protection of the girls of Holy Maiden Peak. If this were to get out, it would truly be rather shameful. To be able to heavily injure some experts of the department for purging officials in such a short amount of time was naturally not the strength of the Orthodox Academy students, but the world-renowned sword array of South Stream Temple." Chun Changsheng said nothing. The one who spoke was Yi Xiaoyan. "If you officials of the imperial court can't even beat us girls, then that would truly be shameful." Zhou Tong did not care. Even if Chun Changsheng personally spoke, no matter how humiliating it was, he could endure it. This was because he felt that he was very mature, so mature that he was rotten. The bottom of his blood-colored official's robe was covered in rotting flesh, and he was never afraid of being defiled. Until the Pope returned to the Sea of Stars, he would not give Chun Changsheng a single chance or excuse to make trouble. Although he was not afraid of Chun Changsheng, just like how he found that youthful energy rather dazzling, he was also unwilling to engage in a battle of courage with these youths for the same reason. It was still those words. He was a very mature and powerful minister, and also a very successful and treacherous minister. Yet Chun Changsheng's next two words made it impossible for him to maintain his silence and the peace in his heart. Chun Changsheng was not deliberately trying to humiliate him, but he truly did want to know the answer. This sort of calmness and seriousness made Zhou Tong feel like his soul could no longer remain unseen. Because he could not answer Chun Changsheng's question, Chun Changsheng said, "After I came to the capital, I often heard people say that if you die, only Shui Xingchuan will collect your corpse." This was a very widespread saying on the continent, and Zhou Tong had heard it more than once. His eyes narrowed into cold slits. Chun Changsheng looked at him and asked seriously, "Now that he's been killed by you, who will collect your corpse after you die?" This was a very simple question. A simple deduction was enough to reach a conclusion. But Zhou Tong could not answer, because he did not want that sort of ending. No one wanted to have that sort of ending, dying without a burial ground. First of all, thank you, everyone. Secondly, just as I said before, in this period of time, a rather long period of time, I will definitely write very slowly, and it will be common for me to break chapters. Then, on Weibo and WeChat, I will leave a link to vote on the style of the cover of the second simplified Chinese episode of Story of Choosing Heaven. Everyone knows that the cover of the first episode was rather mediocre, but as the saying goes, work hard and rainbows. If everyone works hard, it will definitely get better and better. Finally, I want to remind everyone that I will definitely not borrow money from my readers or anything. Please do not be deceived. I am rather rich, and this is all thanks to everyone. At the very least, maintaining a decent living is not a problem. I also do not know how to do business, because other authors have encountered similar situations. I am just telling everyone. Chapter 691. As the most famous treacherous minister, sycophant, ruthless official, and thug in history, Zhou Tong had no friends. Suli had also often said that he had no friends, but these were two different matters. Whether they were his schoolmates, colleagues, or even fellow Taoists, they all wanted nothing more than for Zhou Tong to quickly die, such as those princes currently in power in the court. If Zhou Tong really did die, there would naturally be no one to collect his corpse. In truth, he had once had a friend who was willing to collect his corpse. Alas, that friend had been personally killed by him and had almost died without a burial. So in this autumn, one could already see the distant future. Zhou Tong would assuredly die without a burial. He had no way of blaming others or this world, because all of this was his own doing. From this moment onwards, he would be uneasy, frustrated, perplexed, unable to see any hope of living, until he finally died without a burial. Qin Changxing's question was not a curse, but a calm analysis, a calm exposure. This was very terrifying. The scene became abnormally quiet. Whether it was the officials of the department for purging officials or the students of the Orthodox Academy, no one spoke for a very long time. At this moment, the only person that could break the silence was Zhou Tong himself. He looked at Qin Changxing and said with extreme solemnity and seriousness, "The venerable Taoist will naturally take care of my funeral." This was the only thing he could think of in this short amount of time, the greatest possibility of breaking Qin Changxing's conjecture. He was Shang Xingzhou's dog. When he died, his master would always feel some pity. Qin Changxing looked at him and said, "I understand him better than you do. Every corpse has value to him. When a dog he raises dies, he will either eat the meat to nourish himself, or he will share the meat with the people of the town to gain a good reputation. If that dog has ever bitten someone, he will also not mind grinding its bones to ashes so that the people still alive can vent their anger." Zhou Tong felt a little cold, and then a little hot. Sweat began to appear on his blood-red official's robe. "Everyone will die," he said to Qin Changxing. Qin Changxing knew that he was speaking of the Pope. Zhou Tong continued, "Then have you ever thought, when the time comes, who will collect your corpse for you?" Without waiting for Qin Changxing to speak, he stared into Qin Changxing's eyes and continued, "Don't forget, you are only a plaything for the important figures. You are only a substitute." From the very beginning, when he said the Taoist master will arrange for my funeral, to these 3 consecutive sentences, there was only one problem. Qin Changxing's question had touched upon Zhou Tong's weakest spot. He began to feel uneasy, even faintly fearful. Qin Changxing said, "I don't know who will collect my corpse. I only know that before I die, I will definitely kill you first." There was only the gentle whistling of the autumn wind both inside and outside the Shui residence. Similarly, this was not a threat because when he said this, his expression was very calm. Of course, this was not a joke because there was no smile on his calm face. He was very serious. It was a declaration. Qin Changxing declared to the entire world, no matter what, Zhou Tong would definitely die before him. Zhou Tong would die a violent death. There was also the previous question. That was, he would definitely make Zhou Tong die a tragic death. The Shui residence was deathly silent. The officials of the department for purging officials all had abnormally nasty expressions, and the students of the Orthodox Academy were also rather nervous. No matter what, Zhou Tong was still a minister of the court. Not even the Pope or the Emperor would make this sort of declaration. Chen Changxing's declaration might have been very satisfying, but what sort of turmoil would it cause? To him, this was not a problem. He was not using this to vent his emotions. He was very calmly expressing his thoughts. As for what others thought, he did not care. After saying these words, he walked over to Madame Shui. As for the young lady and steward of the Shui estate who had been restrained by those officials, they had naturally been rescued. Zhou Tong gazed at his back and expressionlessly asked, "Can you kill me?" Chen Changsheng did not stop, did not turn around. "That night, I already killed you once. Do you think that you're so righteous that you're saying all this nonsense with power and conviction? Following one's heart. Just how many times are you prepared to repeat those cliches?" Zhou Tong finally said, "No one has the same thoughts as you, just like no one has come here." Reality proved that Zhou Tong was wrong. Not long after Chen Changxing's arrival, the Shui estate welcomed another guest. This guest had a very special status. Not even Zhou Tong could do anything to him. At the same time, it also exceeded everyone's expectations. The important personage who had come to pay respects to Shui Xingchuan was the Prince of Zhongshan, Chen Xishuan. This prince, who had suffered countless humiliations in the Tianhai government, naturally did not have a good expression towards Chen Changsheng, and it was even more so towards Zhou Tong. He lit an incense stick for Shui Xingchuan, glanced at Chen Changsheng, and then spat on Zhou Tong's face. Soon after, the Minister of Rites came, as did a few important figures of the orthodoxy. Tianhai Shengxue finally came as well. Many people noticed that Tianhai Shengxue had a faint wound on his face, probably caused by the conflict that had occurred when he had been preparing to leave the estate. The appearance of such an important personage in the Shui estate was tantamount to slapping Zhou Tong in the face. No matter how much Zhou Tong could endure, he could not remain here any longer. Just as he was about to leave, he saw Prince Chen Lu. "If I were you, I would definitely silently pray that Chen Changsheng can smoothly succeed the position of Pope." Prince Chen Lu looked at him and seriously said, "Otherwise, he will definitely fulfill those words." Back then, on the Divine Avenue of the Li Palace, Archbishop Meilisha had declared to the entire world that Chen Changsheng would obtain first rank of the first banner in the grand examination. In the end, Chen Changsheng had truly succeeded. Today, in front of the Shui estate's morning hall, Chen Changsheng had declared to the entire world that he would definitely have Zhou Tong die a tragic death. "There are many people who want to kill me, but I've still managed to survive all these years." Why? Zhou Tong smiled, his smile somewhat savage. "Because I've never considered myself a person. I'm keenly aware that I'm just a dog. Dogs all had masters. When beating a dog, one had to look at its master's face. And this dog of his would always find the most powerful master. Those crazy, hot-blooded youths who have had their reason washed away by youth have always wanted to kill me. But can they kill me? As for those people who have the ability to kill me, are they so blind that they can't see who my master is? No matter how much Chen Changsheng says, he still won't dare to move against me, right?" Zhou Tong smiled, the savagery in his smile gradually transforming into ridicule and exhaustion toward this world and himself. This was true because he had always been an upper-level star condensation cultivator with countless assassins and experts under his command. Those who had the ability to kill him had to be the true experts of the continent. And true experts had never been isolated. They had their own sects, their own descendants, and many people that they needed to take care of, like Zhu Luo of the past. As an expert of the divine domain, if he wanted to kill Zhou Tong, it would not be too difficult, but in the past few years, he had never attempted this. The young and courageous person who had come to kill Zhou Tong did not have the ability to kill him. The person who could kill him assuredly had experienced the vicissitudes of life, was mature and steady, and understood the principle of considering the overall situation. There were very few people like Chen Changsheng. Even if it was him, if he wanted to inherit the position of Pope, he could not touch Zhou Tong. In Zhou Tong's view, that declaration was just the vicious words of a young person. Besides Chen Changsheng, who else could it be? The person who had the ability to kill him would assuredly not be so naive and childish. Thus, He had always been safe. At this moment, a large carriage carrying a crabapple tree drove into the capital. The roots of the crabapple tree were well preserved, wrapped in fresh earth. The accompanying red cavalry waved their horsewhips, driving away the pedestrians and cursing the time. On the side of the official road, a man quietly watched these sights, not saying a word. His blue clothes had been washed to the point of somewhat whitening, starched to a very straight line. His 2 eyebrows drooped down, making him seem rather wretched. He was like an accountant who was owed a lot of money. He was also like a broken blade wrapped in coarse cloth. Chapter 692. The once deserted Shui estate was still not very lively, but at the very least, some people had come, and all of them important figures. In front of the memorial tablet, the Prince of Zhongshan very casually nodded his head, then turned and left. The Minister of Rites very earnestly lit an incense stick and then whispered something. No one knew what he was saying. A quiet room had been set up in the eastern courtyard. Chen Changsheng, Su Moyu, Prince Chen Lu, and Tianhai Xingxue sat on chairs. The 4 of them were all very young. The oldest, Tianhai Xingxue, was only 30-some years old. Chen Changsheng looked at the wound on Tianhai Xingxue's face and wanted to say something. Tianhai Xingxue was the first to speak. After the grand examination, the grudges between the Orthodox Academy and Tianhai Xingxue had been resolved, and there was even a private tacit understanding between them. That tacit understanding and the promise they had made seemed so fragile in the coup of the Mausoleum of Books, unable to withstand a single blow, but the 2 sides still had a tacit understanding. And just as was said before, they were all still young. When young people spoke, they were much less stale and more direct. You should be well aware that the important figures that have come to the Shui estate today all want to borrow your power to probe or confirm the current situation in the court. Tianhai Xingxue continued. The venerable Taoist supreme authority in the imperial court requires Zhou Tong to be alive to prove it. At least up until now, no one has dared to challenge this point, but I believe that as time passes, our father will no longer be willing to remain a junior. His father was Tianhai Chenwu, and Prince Chenlu's father was the Prince of Xiang. They were both truly important figures of the great Zhou dynasty. Chen Changsheng understood his meaning. After a moment of silence, he said, "No one knows how long that will take. You cannot casually step forward because you're uncertain about the path ahead, because that is very easy to walk into a wrong path." Prince Chen Lu looked at his expression and earnestly advised, "In any matter, the greater picture is the most important. You succeeding as Pope is the greater picture that is more important than anything else. It is worth enduring and waiting for." Chen Changsheng said nothing. He had a different view of this matter. He understood his teacher better than anyone else, including the Pope. In the 14 years he had lived in Xining Village's old temple, that middle-aged Taoist had been both a teacher and a father to him. But now that he carefully thought about it, neither he nor Yurin had ever seen the true face of that middle-aged Taoist. All they had seen was a corner of a mountain shrouded in thick fog, a line in the blue sky on a cloudy day, a flower by the stream. Now that so many things had happened, many scenes and fragments of memories were gradually condensing and taking shape. Whether it was the flowers by the stream, the mountain in the fog, the blue sky behind the clouds, or the Taoist scriptures in the temple, these seemingly aimless details actually hid infinite wisdom and wisdom. They formed the real picture, which was his teacher, Shang Xingzhou. The Pope wanted to pass the orthodoxy into Chen Changsheng's hands. He believed that by relying on the strength of the Li Palace and his own prestige, it would be enough to guarantee that after he returned to the Sea of Stars, at least no one within the orthodoxy would dare oppose this matter. Then, as long as the orthodoxy was stable and unified, the imperial court would have no means of interfering in this matter. But Chen Changsheng knew that this matter would definitely not develop like this. He was very sure that the day his martial uncle the Pope returned to the Sea of Stars would be the day his teacher moved against him. He would either be killed, or like the little black dragon, forever imprisoned in some abyss that would never see the light of day. Regardless of which result it was not the result he wanted. Tianhai Xingxue, sensed something and said, "If you really think that something major is going to happen, you should make preparations now." Chen Changsheng shook his head. Any kind of preparation is too meaningless. Just like that night, when the imperial design lost its effectiveness, the entire situation in the capital rested on the battle in the Mausoleum of Books. The history of the continent had always been decided by the experts of the divine domain. There was an insurmountable chasm between the divine and the secular. No matter how talented Qin Changsheng was in cultivation, it was impossible for him to cross this chasm in a few short weeks. "You should leave." Prince Chenlu had a different view from Tianhai Xingxue. "Take advantage of the fact that the Pope can still force your teacher to not move. This is the best and final opportunity." Sumoyu glanced at Qin Changsheng. In the Orthodox Academy, he had once made a similar proposal. Qin Changsheng said nothing. He knew that he could not leave. Tianhai Xingxue left. Before walking out of the quiet room, he said, "In a few more days, the celebration will begin." Many major events had taken place this autumn. The Tianhai Empress had returned to the Sea of Stars, and the Demon Lord had fallen into the abyss of death. There were also other events that were about to take place. The only thing that could compare to these two events was the confluence of the North and South. In a few days, the celebration for the confluence of the North and South would be held in the capital. Based on what was said in the spring, the White Emperor couple might come to observe the ceremony. Qin Changsheng understood what Tianhai Xingxue wanted to remind him of. Luo Luo might return to the capital. Zhou Tong returned to the alley of the Northern Military Department. He stood at the base of the courtyard wall, his hands held behind him as he gazed at the deep hole in the tree. His expression was indifferent, and he said nothing as he waited for the crabapple tree to return. In the autumn sky, the shrill cry of a bird suddenly resounded. He and several of his subordinates raised their heads and saw a black silhouette dejectedly and powerlessly descend from the sky. This was a red eagle, a creature most suited for long-distance flight. In a single night, it could cross 1,000 mountains and 10,000 rivers without feeling tired. This red eagle that had returned from the south had died of exhaustion. A major event had assuredly occurred in the south. The Mountley Sword Sect? The Qiushan clan? Or Scholatry Manor? Zhou Tong's brows rose. A subordinate hurried over to present an urgent report from the south. Wang Pa had left Scholatry Manor. The spies of a department for purging officials who had been following him this entire time had been thrown off at Clear River 2 days ago, losing track of Wang Pa. No one knew where Wang Pa was going or where he was now. Zhou Tong stared at his subordinate, saying nothing. The subordinate's voice was somewhat hesitant. He might come to the capital. Zhou Tong's expression subtly changed. After a moment of silence, he suddenly said, "I want to enter the palace." The subordinates were somewhat unable to react. If Wang Pa really was coming to the capital, why was His Excellency not hurriedly arranging for people to intercept or kill him, but instead rushing to enter the palace? "Are all of you deaf?" Zhou Tong's face was rather pale, his voice rather shrill. He was in a rush to enter the palace because he was currently very uneasy, even afraid. Only in the imperial palace, under the gaze of the venerable Taoist, would he feel safe. He was very sure that Wang Pa would come to the capital. He was very sure of what Wang Pa wanted to do. Upon returning to the Orthodox Academy, Qin Changsheng also learned of this news. Sumwei was very confused. What is he doing in the capital? To offer sacrifices to Xue Xingchuan? No one dared to collect Xue Xingchuan's corpse. No one dared to pay homage. At this sort of time, if Wang Pa appeared, it would very much conform to the impression the common people had of him. Qin Changsheng did not believe this. He knew that it was not to offer sacrifices, nor was it for anything else. Wang Pa had only come to the capital to do one thing. He wanted to kill Zhou Tong. Chapter 693. The news that Wang Pa might come to the capital quickly spread, causing many people to be astonished. After Su Li, Wang Pa became the greatest idol in the hearts of the younger generation of cultivators on the continent. He was not as free and at ease as Su Li, nor was he as charming, cold, and emotionless, but he was also a cultivation genius rarely seen in 100 years. He had once forced snow-treading Sun Mei to guard the Mausoleum of Books, not giving painted armor Xiao Zhang or Liang Wang's son any chance. There were many experts beneath the divine domain, such as Xue Xingchuan. Even though he was ranked at the top of the Proclamation of Liberation, he was publicly acknowledged as the strongest. And compared to Su Li, he was more in line with the common definition of a hero, such as that night rain in Xuanyang City. Most importantly, the aura of legend about him was too thick. As the only descendant of a declining clan, he had grown up in an extremely vile environment, even more arduous than other cultivation geniuses. After working as an accountant in the Wunshui Tangs for a few years, he began to travel the world. In just 10 some years, he established Scholatry Manor in the south and became a local tyrant. Just like Su Mayu, upon learning of this news, everyone's greatest question was, why had he come to the capital, and what was he preparing to do? The allusion to Wang Po of Tianliang was a story known to the entire continent. As a descendant of the Wang clan, the meaning behind his name, Wang Po, was obvious. Perhaps it was for this reason that the imperial court had always been wary of him and had attempted to suppress him countless times. He was also well aware of this, so he rarely appeared in the capital. Wang Po coming to the capital was naturally a major event. In the past, even if he came to the capital, he would come noiselessly and inconspicuously, such as on the night of Sun Mei's death. The present situation was completely different. Even if he wanted to enter the capital in a low-profile manner, he could not do so. On that night, in the Mausoleum of Books, Zhu Luo had not yet recovered from his heavy injuries and had forcefully taken action, initiating the grand battle of the entire world against Tianhai. He had paid the price of his body and soul, all for the sake of obtaining the promise that the new government represented by Shang Xingzhou would make, that the Wang clan would never be able to rise again. The Wang clan was Wang Po. If Wang Po had remained in the south and quietly guarded Scholatry Manor, with the Mountly Sword sect and the other sects watching out for him, the imperial court would not have been able to move against him, as the confluence of the north and south required a superficial peace. But if he left Scholatry Manor and entered the capital alone, the imperial court would never let go of this chance. No matter how strong he was no match for the great Zhou imperial court. If he appeared in the capital, the court had countless methods to kill him. Therefore, no one understood why he had come. Chun Changxing understood, because he and Wang Po had gone through thick and thin together in Xuanyang City. He admired this powerful warrior very much. In the past 2 years, he had been trying to learn from him. This was also what Tang 36 was worried about. Besides Chun Changsheng, there was another person who clearly understood Wang Po's intentions. That was Zhou Tong himself. Therefore, when he heard the news, he immediately went to the palace and asked to see Shang Xingzhou. Not long after he entered the palace, the situation in the capital grew tense once more. From the Ministry of Military Affairs to the Ministry of Justice, from the Department for Purging Officials to the City Gate Department, countless experts and assassins began to search the streets. Qin Changsheng was a little worried. After thinking for a whole night, he risked asking people from the Orthodoxy to help him search, but he didn't find anything. The imperial court did not find anything either. No one could find Wang Po. He disappeared just like that. Time passed slowly, and the feeling of autumn became stronger and stronger. The celebration of the confluence of the North and South was approaching, and the great Zhou imperial court had made many preparations. All the famous buildings in the capital had been renovated, and even the Mausoleum of Books had been tidied up. But the mood in the capital was not completely cheerful or relaxed, because the aftermath of the coup of the Mausoleum of Books had still not completely dissipated. The Orthodox Academy was still unwilling to hand over the Divine Empress's body, and Wang Po had still not been found. At this time, the Orthodox Academy received 2 letters. One came from Holy Maiden Peak, personally written by Su Yurong. She had returned to South Stream Temple, and logically speaking, she should have called back the disciples of South Stream Temple. This was also mentioned in the letter, but she still left behind 18 girls for Chun Changsheng. Chun Changsheng was well aware that these female disciples controlled the spirit of the South Stream Temple Sword Array. if they used their full strength, as long as they were not attacked by an expert of the divine domain or an army. He would be safe. The other letter came from Wen Shui, personally written by Tang 36. Besides Chen Changsheng, no one knew the contents of this letter, not even Su Moyu. Su Moyu and the teachers and students of the Orthodox Academy only knew that after Chen Changsheng read the letter, he was in an extremely low mood and fell silent for a very long time. Golden ginkgo leaves covered the ground of New North Bridge. Not far away was the Imperial Palace. Light shone from within and fell on the ground, as if the setting sun had returned to the world. Standing under the tree and seeing this sight, Chen Changsheng silently thought, the sun will not return when it sets, and the friends that have left, it seems like they will not have the chance to return. The entire world seemed to be golden, causing the color of the well to seem even more serene and serene. When the light in the Imperial Palace slightly dimmed, Chen Changsheng's figure disappeared from under the tree. A breeze stirred up at the edge of the well, causing the golden leaves to flutter about. It was a very beautiful sight. The ginkgo leaves outside the imperial city were a very famous sight in the capital. Very few people knew that outside the capital, there was a Taoist temple called Tanja. That place had a similar scenery, perhaps even more beautiful. In the middle of the courtyard behind the Taoist temple, there was an extremely old ginkgo tree. According to legend, it was personally planted by Emperor Taizong. When autumn came, the ancient tree would be covered in golden leaves, resembling golden clouds, and also resembling fireworks. The base of the tree was also covered in leaves, piled up in a thick pile, resembling a golden cloud descending to the ground. If seen from a distance, it would resemble a golden waterfall. In the depths of the golden ginkgo leaves, there was a stone table, and beside the table was a stone stool. At this moment, there was a person sitting on the stool. He was not drinking tea, but was comprehending the blade. The entire continent knew that he had come to the capital. Countless people searched the capital for traces of him, but to no avail. This was because although he had come to the capital, he had not entered the city. If the common people were to know of this, they would definitely be shocked because this was completely different from his usual conduct. In the people's view, since he had come to the capital, he would definitely enter the capital. Because his person was just like his path of the blade, both were straight. Zhou Tong had also thought this way, but he was also wrong. Wangpa had already stayed at Tanja Temple for 11 days. Every day, he would come to meditate under the ginkgo tree. He comprehended the blade, but did not practice it. The metal blade was always sheathed, the sheath on his knee. The ancient tree incessantly shed its leaves, covering the earth. It was so pure and dazzling that it was difficult to imagine what lay beneath the leaves. Those golden leaves would naturally fall on his body, piling up in his clothes and gradually covering the sheath, making it difficult to imagine what the blade in the sheath looked like. Wang Po's path of the blade, in this sky full of yellow leaves, was faintly changing. Chapter 694. Time passed and autumn deepened. The yellow leaves covering the sky had all fallen, and all that was left of the ancient trees in Tanja Temple were bare trunks and branches. The path leading into the mountain was still covered in fallen leaves, but after being drenched by the autumn rain that had begun last night, it had lost all its beauty. It was just as vexing as a soaked bedding. In the end, the wet fallen leaves still had some advantages. When walking on them, they would not make any noise. Borrowing the cover of the gloomy sky and the drizzle, several dozen experts of the great Zhou army and even more assassins and spies of the department for purging officials stepped on the wet fallen leaves and noiselessly crossed the mountain path, sneaking into the autumn forest halfway up the mountain. All the paths leading from Tanja Temple to the outside world had been completely controlled. No one could leave. There was a rustling sound, somewhat crisp and dry. It was like someone was walking on the golden leaves from several days ago, crushing countless withered leaves. This was not the sound of the leaves shattering, but the autumn wind passing through the curtain of rain and incessantly rustling the paper. A man walked over from the mountain path, his face covered by a piece of white paper that covered his nose and mouth. Only where his eyes should have been were two black holes. making him seem abnormally terrifying. Painted armor, Xiao Zhang. The rain falling from the sky automatically avoided his body. There was not the slightest trace of water on that piece of white paper, clean and dry. In this age of blooming wildflowers, countless cultivating geniuses and tyrannical experts had appeared. Among them, he was the most terrifying, the most powerful. Like Sun Mei, he had been invincible his entire life, but he had never defeated Wang Pe, not even once. Whether it was in the Boiling Stone Summit or the Proclamation of Liberation, he could only rank second. But he was not afraid, much less discouraged. He constantly challenged Wang Pe, losing and fighting. Even when he suffered a cultivation defect and almost died, his will did not waver in the slightest. To be under one person was already a very extraordinary position, but he did not want to accept it. Today, in the desolate autumn rain, he had walked over from the mountain path, naturally intending to fight Wang Pe again. He had never considered whether or not Wang Pe would accept, because the experts of the imperial court had gathered and surrounded Tanja Temple. If Wang Pe wanted to leave alive, he first had to defeat him. He had to defeat him again, or perhaps be defeated by him. The autumn wind rustled the white paper, carrying with it the sound of withered leaves. The autumn rain fell on a mountain path, but how could the wet leaves make any sound? Xiao Zhang did not walk to Tanja Temple, because a person had appeared in front of him. Stepping on wet fallen leaves would indeed not make any sound. Just like that, that person quietly passed through several blockades on the mountain path. Not even Xiao Zhang could sense in advance. Who was this person? How could he be so powerful? That person was dressed in black and allowed the rain to wet him. He gave off an extremely cold and hard feeling. His clothes, his eyebrows, the lines of his shoulders, his hands behind his back, all seemed to be cast from iron. Just by standing in front of the mountain path, he separated the autumn rain from the ground, the autumn wind from the white paper, and Tanja Temple from the surrounding mountains. He was like a wall, and it wasn't an ordinary wall made of mud or bricks. It was an iron wall that didn't allow wind to pass through. Xiao Zhang knew who this person was. The two black holes on the white paper seemed even more serene, and one could faintly see the fanaticism in them. "You want to stop me?" he asked the man who was like an iron wall. The man expressionlessly looked at him, as if he felt that Xiao Zhang's words were extremely stupid and not worth replying to. The entire world knew that painted armor Xiao Zhang was a true madman, his way of doing things abnormally violent and arrogant. No one dared to lightly offend him, much less look down on him. Yet this person had done so, and shockingly, even though the fighting spirit in Xiao Zhang's serene eyes was growing stronger and stronger, in the end, he did not attack. Xiao Zhang thought of that rumor. Given this person's relationship with the great Western continent, there was no reason for him to attack for Wang Pe's sake. He asked, "Since it's not him, why are you blocking my way?" The man replied, "Since I've come, you naturally have to leave. You're no match for him, and I don't want you to alert him." Xiao Zhang was furious, the white paper on his face flapping. Suddenly, the autumn wind vanished from his face. He fell silent, because he understood what this person meant. This isn't fair to him. Xiao Zhang stared into his eyes. This person clearly wanted to go to Tanja Temple and fight Wang Pe. Xiao Zhang said that this wasn't fair to Wang Pe. This meant that in his view, this person's cultivation was far above Wang Pe's. Logically speaking, he should not have lowered himself to fight Wang Pe. Wang Pe was a member of the Proclamation of Liberation, and in the eyes of the common people, he was the strongest expert below the divine domain. Just who in the world could be said to be stronger than him? If there really was, then it was assuredly one of those powerful figures of the divine domain, those old monsters that could be counted on two hands. Just who was this person? Which one of the storms of the 8 directions was it? Or was it some expert that had lived in seclusion for many years? Xiao Zhang knew who this person was, so he said that it was unfair, but this did not mean that he feared him. He seemed to see Wang Pe collapsing beneath that ancient tree, his body covered in blood. He found this somewhat difficult to accept. Just like Sun Mei, he had spent his entire life trying to surpass Wang Pe. He found it impossible to accept that Wang Po would be killed before he had even succeeded. At this moment, he felt an intense desire to stop this man. This person could kill Wang Po. Wang Po was stronger than him, yet he wanted to stop him. No matter how he looked at it, this was an extremely crazy idea. He had always been a very crazy person. Rain fell on the spear, drenching his hand. It was Xiao Zhang's hand, very tight, very strong. What right do you have to talk to me about fairness? The man glanced at Xiao Zhang, his expression indifferent, as if he didn't exist. His shoulder, which was like an iron wall, had been washed by the autumn rain as if it had been polished countless times. It exuded a metallic luster, and then its edge was revealed. A groan pierced through the white paper. The autumn rain washed the spear, his fingers turning white. In the end, Xiao Zhang still did not take out his spear. Or perhaps it was better to say that he could not take out his spear. He could only watch as the man walked through the autumn rain towards Tanja Temple, like an iron wall, his body glowing with a cold light. Tai Shu, one of the storms of the 8 directions. He was born in the great western continent. When he was young, he had fallen into the sea to escape. Crossing the ocean, he had almost died, but fortunately, he had been saved by a person on the shore. That person was called Guan Xinka. In the past 10 years, he had wandered the southern sea, comprehending the heavenly Tao. Now, he had finally returned. He comprehended the heavenly Tao and cultivated the fleshly body, making it incomparably powerful. The blooming of the iron tree was on par with Byonghong's little red flower, but no one had ever seen it with their own eyes. He arrived at Tanja Temple. The leaves of the ancient tree had already fallen, leaving a few yellow leaves on the ground, soaking in the rain. Tai Shu walked to the stone bench, sat down, and closed his eyes, just like Wang Po in the last few days. Chapter 695. After some time, Tai Shu opened his eyes, a hint of viciousness flashing through them, and then a hint of perplexity. He seemed to be in a particularly complex mood. Under the ancient tree, among the yellow leaves, on the stone bench, he had sensed the qi left behind by Wang Po a few days ago. He had not expected that Wang Po's path of the blade had become even more profound. At Wang Po's level of cultivation, advancing even a single step was incredibly difficult. Yet this person had been able to advance so much in such a short amount of time. Back in Xuanyang City, when Wang Po was facing Zhu Luo, although his blade was strong, he had not been able to find a single opportunity. And after quietly comprehending in Tanja Temple for many days, the situation had changed. If Wang Po was allowed to continue advancing, no one knew when he would cross that threshold. For the first time, Tai Shu felt pressured, and then his killing intent grew even stronger. Neither the imperial court nor he would permit the day to come when Wang Po's path of the blade reached great success. Rising from the stone bench, he gazed at Tanja Temple, quietly sensing the flow of qi in the world. There was someone in the temple, someone of a very high level of cultivation, only a few strands away from him. He walked in that direction. The wet yellow leaves on his shoes shattered into the finest strands, like chrysanthemums in full bloom. The autumn wind tore through the curtain of rain and pushed open the door of Tanja Temple. When he was still 10 some zhang from the temple's threshold, the cold autumn wind did not wreak havoc, instead being buffeted by 2 fresh and indifferent gusts of wind. These 2 gusts of wind came from a pair of sleeves. The person in the temple was not Wang Po, but Mao Qiuyu. The fence to the side of the temple was pushed open and Taoist Baisher walked out of the rain. Linghai Zhuang and Taoist Siyuan had come from the mountains to the east and west. In the autumn rain, the silhouettes of many red-clothed figures could be faintly seen in the forest. For prefects of the orthodoxy, each wielding a precious treasure, had brought countless cardinals of profound cultivation and had tightly surrounded Tanja Temple. This array of forces was truly enormous. If one wanted to kill an expert of the divine domain, one needed this sort of array of forces. Tai Shu looked at Mao Qiuyu, his eyes slowly narrowing. His killing intent had not diminished in the slightest, but had instead become even more frightening. As expected, The Li Palace had moved. Did they want to protect Wang Per? Or did they really want to use this chance to kill him? He was keenly aware that if it was the latter, then even if he could leave with his life, he would still have to pay a grievous price. He stretched out his hands into the rain, letting the cold rain wash over them. He gazed at Mao Qiuyu, who was slowly walking out of the temple, and expressionlessly asked, "Is this His Holiness the Pope's decree?" Mao Qiuyu didn't directly answer his question. Instead, he looked into the distance. Tai Shu had already sensed it, which was why he asked this question. In the distance were the mountains. The yellow and red colors brought about by autumn had long been washed away by the cold rain. At some point, a royal carriage had appeared at the edge of the cliff. The Prince of Xiang had personally arrived. The imperial court's attempt to kill Wang Pa might become the Li Palace's attempt to encircle and kill Tai Shu. If that royal carriage hadn't appeared on the cliff, if the faint thunder-like hoofbeats of the army hadn't come from behind the mountain, no matter who the target was, the situation had already become clear. His Majesty wants me to ask you something. Mao Qiuyu looked at Tai Shu and asked, "Have you all forgotten the oath you made to the starry sky?" Many years ago, the experts of the divine domain, led by the Pope, had used the starry sky as a guide to swear an oath. The content of the oath was that the interests of the human race would always come first. They would never take the initiative to move against those cultivating geniuses that bore the future and hopes of the human race. Wang Pa was naturally at the top of that list. Back in Xuanyang City, Zhu Luo had attacked him with his sword. He could already be said to have broken the oath, but he could still find some excuse. His sword had stabbed at Su Li. It was just that Wang Pa had insisted on standing in front of Su Li. And today, Tai Shu had brought the autumn rain to Tanja Temple. It was clear that he wanted to kill Wang Pa. So what excuse or reason could he find? The Pope had asked Mao Qiuyu to ask him this question. So how could he answer? Tai Shu did not answer. Mao Qiuyu looked at him and said, "Since you cannot answer, then do not touch Wang Pa." Tai Shu's gaze grew even colder. His hands, washed by the rain, became even purer and whiter, like lotus flowers. This meant that he was currently very angry. A man could not be happy for 100 days, and a flower could not be red for 1,000 days. He laughed with a hint of mockery. The Pope's days were already numbered. His Holiness also wanted me to tell you. Mao Qiuyu seemed to know what he was thinking and calmly said, "If after he returns to the Sea of Stars, you still insist on moving against Wang Pa, then the Li Palace will exterminate your entire clan." If the Li Palace was also a sect, then it was assuredly the strongest in the world, because it was the orthodoxy. No cultivator could directly contend against the orthodoxy. Not even someone as powerful as Tai Shu. Not even the elder of heavenly secrets, who had once been the head of the storms of the 8 directions and possessed the terrifying pavilion of heavenly secrets. Of course, as long as an expert of the divine domain did not fall into a tight encirclement like today, even if they were no match for the Li Palace, they would still be very difficult to kill. But although cultivating the Tao was lonely, there were very few cultivators that were truly lonely. They had family, relatives, friends, schoolmates, people of the same race, people of the same Tao. After Mao Qiuyu finished speaking, a deathly stillness reigned. "Exterminate your entire clan." These 4 words were just like Tai Shu. They were unyielding, cold, and had an intimidating metallic flavor. Tai Shu looked at him and said, "All of you should be well aware that Wang Pa has come to the capital to kill." Mao Qiuyu's expression did not change as he said, "If he kills, he will violate the laws of Zhou and will be punished by the officials of the imperial court." Many people's gazes fell on the royal carriage on the cliff in the distance. The Prince of Xiang did not leave the carriage. Tai Shu laughed, his laughter tinged with derision and derision. Mao Qiuyu's words represented the Li Palace's stance. This stance was very cold. He wants to kill, and all of you don't care. I haven't even killed anyone, so why does your Holiness care? Because you have the heart. This is not fair. Mao Qiuyu did not answer Tai Shu's question. He turned and walked off the mountain. Linghai Zhuang and the others followed. The Pope truly had no desire to kill Tai Shu. Just like in the Orthodox Academy, the Li Palace was only displaying its strength. To protect the emperor, one needed to hold a blade in front of them. To escort, one needed to hold a boat in front of them. There was no need to use a blade, no need to actually collide. It was enough. Taishu watched the orthodoxy leave in the autumn rain, the corners of his eyes twitching. These people were all important figures of the orthodoxy, but none of them were a match for him, so he did not dare to strike. It truly was not fair, just as he had said to Xiao Zhang on the mountain path. In front of the Pope and the orthodoxy, what right did he have to talk about fairness? The yellow leaves fell, and the chill gradually deepened. This year's winter in the capital seemed to arrive a little earlier than usual. It was still late autumn, but it had already snowed quite a few times. The people of New Northbridge felt this even more keenly. They hid in their homes, constantly rubbing their hands and cursing the weather. No one noticed that this harsh cold had something to do with that abandoned well. The cold wind constantly blew out from the mouth of the well, sobbing like a flute, but also like weeping tears of joy. Chapter 696. No true battle had taken place in the Battle of Tanja Temple, but the dangers hidden within were far more terrifying than the vast majority of battles in the world. On that rainy day, the imperial court and the orthodoxy had mobilized far too many experts. It was simply impossible to conceal the news. The common people quickly learned of Taishu's return from the Southern Sea and that he had come to the capital to kill Wang Pe. At the same time, they also confirmed Wang Po's goal. He had come to kill Zhou Tong. Most importantly, they finally confirmed that the rift between the imperial court and the orthodoxy was growing deeper and deeper. A major problem could arise at any moment. The two great powers that had cooperated in the coup of the Mausoleum of Books had not long ago turned against each other. This was a very difficult matter to understand, but now everyone clearly understood why. Because of Chen Changshen. No one noticed the cold wind emanating from the bottom of New Northbridge, nor did anyone know what Chen Changshen was thinking. He had never left the Orthodox Academy. He quietly sat by the window of the library, reading, not looking at the scenery outside the window, not asking about what was happening outside. Many people guessed that the Divine Empress's body was probably buried in the Orthodox Academy by him, but there was no way to confirm this. Even a powerful figure like Eunuch Lin had returned in defeat. The Li Palace had clearly expressed its stance, so who would dare forcefully charge into the Orthodox Academy to investigate? The imperial court did not continue to issue a decree demanding that the Orthodox Academy hand over the Divine Empress's body, but everyone knew that this matter could not possibly end here. Many people did not understand why Chen Changsheng had done this, including some important figures of the orthodoxy, like Taoist Baishur. If it was just for the right to inherit the orthodoxy, then, with the Pope's decree, he only needed to find a suitable opportunity to display his goodwill to the imperial palace, and they would assuredly withdraw their original plans. But he did not accept the decree, nor did he request it into the palace. He did not send a message to the people of the imperial palace through anyone. He remained silent. By now, the entire world knew that he was a descendant of the descendants of the deceased, that the blood of the Chun clan flowed in his body, but that he was not mother or son to the Divine Empress. Looking back over the past few years, he and the Divine Empress should not have had any affection for each other. Why did he defy 3 decrees in a row? Why did he use his attitude toward Zhou Tong to express his disdain for the imperial court? Why did he have to use silence against his own teacher? Xue Xingchuan had already been buried in Xue. He had been brought back to the capital and imprisoned in Zhou prison. For some complicated reasons, there was probably no danger to his life for the time being. The Xue estate had returned to peace, but no one could forget the liveliness of the Xue estate's funeral a few days ago. Many factions had sent representatives. Was this a nostalgia for the old dynasty or a hatred for the new? Was this respect for the Pope or a challenge to Shang Xingzhou? If he were still in the Tianhai dynasty, Zhou Tong would definitely have used this matter to stir up a great storm. But now, he was uncharacteristically silent. Anyone who knew that someone like Wang Pe was hiding in Jingdou and could walk out of a tea shop on the side of the street at any time and strike at them with a knife light would probably be as silent. What was rather profound was that in the past few days, Zhou Tong didn't remain in the imperial palace like he did in the first few days, instead returning to the northern military department's alley to once again oversee matters. Tai Shu should be nearby. He'll be watching over Zhou Tong. Su Muyu continued. He'll wait for Wang Po to strike and then kill him. This way, he won't violate the oath to the starry sky. Neither His Holiness, the Pope, nor anyone else will be able to punish him. The cold autumn wind blew in through the window and flipped the pages of his book, but it was incapable of causing any change in Chen Chongqing's expression. Seeing him silently sitting by the window, Su Muyu sighed in his heart. That day at Tanja Temple was truly a pity. If the Heavenly Palace had spared no expense and killed Tai Shu in the autumn rain, the current situation would not have been so troublesome. Chen Chongqing's gaze rested on his book as he said, "That day wasn't easy to kill." Su Muyu understood that he was speaking of the royal carriage on the cliff. If Zheshio was the one in charge, he would definitely still act. Since he had spared no expense, there was no need to worry about the royal carriage or the thunderous hooves outside the mountain. The storms of the 8 directions aren't so easy to kill. Even if they succeeded, the Li Palace would still have to pay an enormous price. If Tai Shu really had been killed that day, then of the 4 prefects of the orthodoxy that had walked out of the autumn rain, which one of them would have survived? Chen Chongqing gazed at his book and said, "And it would throw the world into chaos." Su Muyu replied, "If Tang Tang was the one in charge, he would still insist on doing this, because the venerable Taoist would presumably not want to see the world fall into chaos. Then, if he was killed, he was killed." Chen Chongqing did not believe that the matter would develop as he, or as Tang 36, had imagined. The Li Palace had killed Tai Shu to protect Wang Po. Wang Po had come to the capital to kill Zhou Tong. Zhou Tong was a person the Imperial Palace had to protect. Wang Po was a person the Imperial Palace had to kill. Chen Chongqing was keenly aware that his master would not hesitate to throw the world into chaos just because of these 4 sentences. Moreover, Martial Uncle would not do this. He raised his head and gazed out the window at the bleak autumn scenery. Because he is not this sort of person. The Pope was a mighty figure that cared for the world. But he was not a hero, much less an ambitious and ruthless character. When he gazed at the starry sky, he would feel reverence. He wanted to protect Chen Chongqing and Wang Po. But he did not want the world to fall into chaos and the people to be plunged into misery and suffering. It was already extremely difficult for him to maintain the situation in the capital within a manageable range. And the person sitting across from him on the chessboard? The Imperial Palace was very quiet. Many people in front of the hall had seen Shang Xingzhou's silhouette in that room, but they did not know what he was doing. Shang Xingzhou was probably doing something, but no one knew what it was. Just like the coup of the Mausoleum of Books, just like the rebellion of Xiulao City, his silence was often the prelude to a clap of thunder. And no one knew where Wang Po was. The entire world knew that he was in the capital. He wanted to kill someone, but he could not find him. He had vanished, and a certain restaurant in the southern city had gained an accountant from Wenshui. The autumn, the capital grew deeper, and a bone-piercing chill. Fortunately, lanterns and streamers were hung all over the place, making it extremely lively, somewhat diluting the chill. The confluence of the north and south, this grand and anticipated event, had finally been officially announced, and the celebration was about to begin. The celebration was unprecedentedly grand, both to celebrate the success of the confluence of the North and South, and also to completely cleanse the Tianhai Divine Empress's qi left behind by the new government. The diplomatic mission from White Emperor City had arrived in the capital several days in advance. In the end, only one of the White Emperor couple had come. In that heaven-shaking battle with the Demon Lord, the White Emperor had also suffered significant injuries. The one who came was the Empress, the great Western continent's eldest princess. Many people turned their gazes to the Orthodox Academy. Everyone knew that the Orthodox Academy had always had an extremely close relationship with the demi-human race, and Chen Chongqing was Princess Lolua's teacher. So what sort of effect would the arrival of the demi-human diplomatic mission have on the capital? Not even Chun Chongqing knew the answer to this question. On the day the diplomatic mission arrived in the capital, he put down the scroll in his hands for the first time, bathed and changed his clothes, and then waited for an old friend to visit. As expected, it was an old friend, but it was not Luoluo, but Jin Yulu. The princess is at a crucial moment in her breakthrough and is unable to leave. I encountered Xin Yuan Po on the road. He has suffered significant injuries and needs to be nursed back to health, so I did not bring him back. Jin Yulu gazed at him as he spoke, then patted him on the shoulder, and then sighed, unable to leave and not return. Chen Changshang felt somewhat sad. Chapter 697. Of course, it was because he understood that he was sad. But Chen Changsheng was sad, not because of the things he understood, but because of the separation and the difficulty of meeting again. With his current status and his relationship with Luo, the first princess should have met him when she visited the capital, but she did not. This was the attitude of the Yao race. His Majesty is friends with your teacher. Jin Yulu looked at him and sighed. So at the very beginning, His Majesty did not care about your closeness with Princess Luo, and was even happy to see it happen. Yet His Majesty calculated everything, but he did not calculate that your teacher would have other ideas, and that you would have other ideas. Chen Changsheng maintained his silence, not giving any explanation. Jin Yulu continued, Of course, even if your teacher has other ideas, His Majesty has ways to help you maintain the position of successor to the Pope. The words of a saint had boundless authority. Chen Changsheng thought of this phrase. His teacher, Shang Xingzhou, was naturally a saint. But the words of two saints were more powerful than the words of one saint. If the White Emperor firmly supported him, coupled with the Pope's appointment, even Shang Xingzhou could not oppose him. Would the White Emperor support him? Before today, this seemed like a question that did not need to be considered. Everyone believed this to be a matter of course. Chen Changsheng was Luo's teacher and had always been close to the Yao race. For him to inherit the position of Pope, no matter how one looked at it, was the best result for the Yao race. But now it seemed that the White Emperor's attitude had clearly changed. Your actions were too immature. His Majesty is deeply concerned about this. Jin Yulu said, Even if we support you and help you become master of Li Palace, do you have the ability to sit stably on that position? If you can't, then why should we support you? Chen Changsheng's mind was somewhat dazed. Recently, he seemed to have heard the word mature a lot. Entering the capital at the age of 14, he had a steadiness that far surpassed those of his age. Very few people felt that he was lacking in this aspect. But now it seemed that it was still not enough, at least not enough to become an important figure. But what was maturity? Chen Changsheng understood that in the eyes of many people, including the White Emperor couple, he had truly done many immature things. Since his martial uncle the Pope had personally spoken for him, as long as he admitted defeat, surrendered, and humbled himself, his teacher would have no reason not to accept him. Even if he couldn't, he should at least act more mature. For instance, in the last few days, he should not be in the Orthodox Academy, but in the Li Palace, seizing the time to understand everything about the Orthodoxy. For instance, a few days ago, he should not have gone outside the city gate to collect Xue Xingchuan's corpse on the official road and paid his respects to the Xue state. For instance, on that day, even earlier, he had not accepted the decree in the Orthodox Academy. Instead, he had used 1,000 swords to hack eunuch Lin until his entire body was covered in blood. Like that day when he carried the Tianhai Divine Empress's corpse down from the Mausoleum of Books, brushing past his teacher as if they were strangers. Just like in the past few days, he had been looking forward to the arrival of the diplomatic mission from White Emperor City. He thought that there would be people supporting him. Even if there was no one, there was still the demon race. Now, it seemed that this kind of expectation was really ridiculous. He looked out the window. The big banyan tree by the lake could no longer retain its green color. It had become much colder. The surface of the lake was covered with a thin layer of ice, and the withered grass was covered with frost. Yes, these were all immature, naive, childish, hot-blooded, impulsive, chinibu, pitiful, ridiculous. But at least it was warmer than this quiet, bleak and cold world, right? The first princess went to the imperial palace, and then to the Li palace, meeting with Shang and Yin. No one knew what the three saints had said, nor did anyone know what sort of agreement the demi-humans had formed with the imperial court and the orthodoxy. People only knew that she did not go to the Orthodox Academy, nor did she invite the people of the Orthodox Academy to her side palace. She did not see Qin. This was beyond the expectations of many people, and it also made the situation in the capital clear once more. One by one, the southern diplomatic missions arrived. The Longevity Sect, the Qiushan clan, the other great clans, Holy Maiden Peak, and even Scholarly Manor had sent a representative. Everyone could clearly see which way the wind was blowing in the capital, so the first princess adopted the same attitude. Not a single person from the Southern Diplomatic Mission went to the Orthodox Academy. This was because it was sensitive and also because they wanted to express their stance to the imperial court. Moreover, as Southerners, they had no good impression of the Tianhai Divine Empress, so they naturally would not support Qin. Holy Maiden Peak also only sent a few letters and tools to the disciples of South Stream Temple in the Orthodox Academy. One evening, there was a knock on the gate of the Orthodox Academy. A visitor had come. The visitor was Guan Fei Bai, a disciple of the Mount Li Sword sect. The people of the Tradition Academy and the disciples of the Mount Li Sword sect had known each other for 3 years. The story between them was very complicated. It could be said that they were both enemies and friends, but in the end, they still became familiar with each other, because they were truly kindred spirits. This was the first time a disciple of the Mount Li Sword sect had entered the Orthodox Academy. Guan Fei Bai followed behind Su Moyu, taking in the sights of the Orthodox Academy with great interest. Only when he met a few junior sisters of South Stream Temple that he had previously known did he withdraw his gaze. In the library, Chun Chongsheng met with him. He was the future pope. Although Guan Fei Bai was one of the Divine State's 7 laws and a genius disciple of Mount Li, his status was still very far from Qin Chongsheng's. However, the conversation between the two did not turn into an intimate conversation or a friendly meeting. Of course, it was not like it had been in the past, brimming with fierce sword intent and hostility. It was just a simple conversation. This conversation was very simple. Only you came from Mount Li. It's just a formality. Why did so many people come? Why is it you? It doesn't matter who comes. Then why don't you send Qi Jian? Do you have any shame? Su Moyu promptly interjected. Pay attention to your words. Guan Fei Bai angrily glared at Qin Chongsheng and asked, Where's Tang Tang? Why are you looking for him? Of course it's to fight. Testing the sword sounds better. As you wish. He's not here. Where did he go? Home. Then Zhishio? Still fighting? Testing the sword. He's not here. Where did he go? I don't know. Hearing Chun Chongsheng's answer, Guan Fei Bai fell silent. Only now did he know that Tang 36 and Zhishio were not in the Orthodox Academy. He could imagine just how difficult Qin Chongsheng had been in the Orthodox Academy in this period of time. Then I'm leaving. I won't see you out. Since the person he wanted to find was not here and the fight he wanted to fight was not going to happen, he naturally had to leave. But before leaving, Guan Fei Bai had a request. He said to Chun Chongsheng, See me out. Chun Chongsheng shook his head. I won't. Guan Fei Bai insisted. Just see me out to the academy gate. Chun Chongsheng said, I don't want to. If he saw Guan Fei Bai out to the academy gate, he would be seen by many people. Guan Fei Bai wanted people to see him. Qin Chongsheng did not want to drag Mount Li into these muddy waters, so he insisted. Guan Fei Bai thought it over, then said, Then I'm leaving. Qin Chongsheng said, Thank you. Guan Fei Bai walked towards the academy gate, not turning his head. Waving his hand, he said, You're welcome. Tang Tang had returned to Wenshui, but where had Zhishio gone? No one knew. The imperial court would naturally not forget this young wolf expert. The spies of the Department for Purging officials had never ceased their search for him, but they had come up empty-handed, just like Wang Pe. The courtyard in the alley of the Northern Military Department had already been restored to its original state. The flat ground was covered in fresh earth, only waiting for a layer of grass to be planted next spring. When the darkness was at its darkest, The ground was covered in a layer of frost. An extremely soft, grinding sound could be heard from the depths of the earth, like silkworms gnawing on mulberry leaves, like countless earthworms desperately burrowing into the ground before the cold of winter. When autumn was at its deepest, winter arrived. The celebration of the confluence of the North and South had smoothly concluded, but the various diplomatic missions had no intention of leaving the capital, because the Pope's illness was getting worse with each passing day. In the courtyard, Zhou Tong gazed at the withered crabapple tree and muttered, "It's time." To some people it was time. The accountant of the tea house in the southern part of the city bid farewell to the owner, shopkeeper, and waiters before leaving. In these short 10-some days of interaction, everyone in the tea house, from the owner, the shopkeeper, to the most ordinary waiters, felt reluctant to part with him. Chun Changsheng placed a brush back on the inkstone, blew dry the writing on the paper, sealed it, and handed it to Su Moyu before walking out of the library. Su Moyu gazed at his back, knowing that after parting today, it might be difficult to see him again. When I wrote about the night of the Mausoleum of Books, I mentioned 3 squirrels, and then the 3 squirrels sent me a large chest of nuts. I express my thanks here. I mentioned so much today. Where are we going? Is there a free plane ticket or something? Of course, it's just a joke. I wish everyone good health and a happy life. We will strive to meet every day in the book. Chapter 698. The teachers and students of the Orthodox Academy watched as Chun Changsheng walked to the gate of the academy, their gazes very complex and their emotions very sorrowful. The female disciples of South Stream Temple were waiting for him at the gate. Chun Changsheng indicated that the girls did not need to follow him and walked out. "This is the order of the temple master," Yi Xiaoyan angrily yelled from behind him. Chun Changsheng knew that it would be very difficult to convince these girls, so he said to Priest Exan, who was waiting outside the academy, "Please." Priest Exan sighed and waved his hand, indicating that the priests of the Bureau of Ecclesiastic Education and the Orthodoxy Cavalry should step forward and surround the Orthodox Academy. Naturally, they also kept the girls of South Stream Temple within. Chun Changsheng gazed at the Orthodox Academy and silently bid farewell. 3.5 years had passed since that spring. He didn't know when he would meet the Ivy and the people of the Orthodox Academy again. He had written 4 letters and given them to Su Moyu, just as Su Li had done before he left, clearly explaining everything that needed to be said. The chill in the well of New North Bridge was getting heavier and heavier. In another 2 years, the little black dragon would be able to escape. He no longer owed this world, no longer had any burdens on his shoulders, so he could move forward with ease. As he watched his figure disappear into the depths of 100 Flowers Lane, Priest Exan felt rather complex. It didn't take long for the news of Chun Changsheng's departure from the Orthodox Academy to spread to the entire capital. In the last few days of late autumn, Zhou Tong was often not in the Imperial Palace, but in the newly renovated department for purging officials. When this news reached the alley of the Northern Military Department, he was sitting on a new but old armchair that had been repaired with a great deal of effort, drinking tea. He was still drinking tea in the most expensive great crimson gown, and he was still wearing that crimson official's gown that seemed to exude the stench of blood. His face was very pale, his eyes indifferent, as if devoid of human emotion. He looked just like a wraith, prepared to welcome an esteemed guest. He lightly placed the teacup in his hand on the table and calmly ordered his subordinates in the courtyard. The officials accepted the order and hurriedly began to move. The atmosphere inside and outside Zhou prison became exceptionally oppressive and somber. On the distant street, that man exuding a gloomy and cold qi like iron glanced at the sky upon hearing the news. The sky was getting darker, not because of the passage of time, but because the clouds were getting thicker and thicker. It was no longer the season of clear autumn air. It seemed that it was about to snow. It didn't take long for the latest news to reach the alley of the Northern Military Department. Chun Changsheng had entered the Li Palace. In the small courtyard, the most loyal and powerful subordinates looked at the armchair in front of the hall, wondering if their superior was thinking too much. The imperial court had deployed such an array of forces. Even if that person was Chen Changsheng, would he still dare to charge in a Zhou prison? Just because he went to the Li Palace doesn't mean that he won't go anywhere else today. Zhou Tong looked at the red clay teapot in his hand, as if he was looking at an inanimate object. He indifferently said, "Just wait for him to come out." There were no four seasons in the deepest part of the Li Palace, so naturally there was no cold winter. Nor was there any sign that snow was about to fall in that square-cut sky. Just like that pot of green leaf, it was still full of vitality, very tender and very green. As the clear water flowed down, it gently swayed, revealing its beautiful waist. There was no sign of illness on the Pope's face, only that his wrinkles had increased and deepened, making him seem much older. Just like in the autumn before Mei Lisha's death, the old man had revealed his old age in a very short period of time. Seeing the Pope's face, Chen Changsheng felt somewhat sentimental, somewhat sad, somewhat unjust, towards this great earth, towards that starry sky. The Pope was even younger than Shang Xingzhou by 2 years. He was keenly aware that if his martial uncle's demands on himself were not so much in conflict with the current state of the world, making it so difficult for him to obtain a truly tranquil Dao heart, he would not have aged so early. The Pope could tell what he was thinking from his expression. Smiling, he said, "Are you perhaps thinking that good people do not live long?" Chen Changsheng said nothing, then nodded his head. "I'm not a good person." The Pope continued, "Of course, even if this statement is true, we cannot become bad people just because of it." Chen Changsheng very much liked these words. Opening his bright eyes, he earnestly said, "Yes." The Pope wiped away the water droplets on the green leaf, then took a handkerchief from Chen Changsheng's hand and wiped his hands clean. He indicated that he should sit down and asked, "Your master has been very quiet these past few days. Don't you find it strange?" Whether it was the Orthodox Academy's defiance of the decree or Wang Po's entry into the capital, they were both major events for the new government, but Shang Xingzhou had never expressed any opinion on these matters. He had not even spoken during the celebration of the confluence of the North and South. Chen Changsheng was keenly aware that this was not in accordance with his master's personality, but he truly did not care about these matters. In the past few days, he has been constantly attempting to have the imperial court control the pavilion of heavenly secrets, the Pope said. It seems that he is about to succeed. Even if Chen Changsheng did not care about these matters, he still could not help but be shocked at these words. The Pavilion of Heavenly Secrets was no ordinary organization. It possessed unimaginable resources and strength. During the reign of the Divine Empress, it could be said to be the most important pillar of the Great Zhou Imperial Court. Now that the Divine Empress and the Elder of Heavenly Secrets were both dead, if Shang Xingzhou could have the Imperial Court continue to control the Pavilion of Heavenly Secrets, it would truly be extraordinary. In terms of importance, it was impossible to overestimate this matter. Through the rebellion in Shualao City, he had killed humanity's strongest foe in the last 1,000 years, temporarily resolving the danger of the demons invading the south. Afterwards, he had unhesitatingly accepted the Tianhai government's conditions for negotiation, cautiously and steadily pushing forward the confluence of the north and south until both sides signed the contract. If Shang Xingzhou had even settled the Pavilion of Heavenly Secrets, even if he was currently reading books in that small room in the Imperial Palace, rarely meeting people, he would still be a god in the hearts of the common people. To senior brother, this is not perfect. The Pope looked at Chen Changsheng and said, "You know what he was thinking at the very beginning." Chen Changsheng knew. To Shang Xingzhou, the most perfect situation was that after the Pope died, he could once more possess the authority of the Orthodoxy. However, although he was a legitimate successor of the Orthodoxy, so many things had happened in the past, and he was also the Pope's senior brother. No matter how one looked at it, it was impossible for him to succeed as Pope. Thus, after that night in the Mausoleum of Books, the first thing he did was push out Mu Jiushi in an attempt to replace Chen Changsheng, but he had failed. It was precisely because he had failed to smoothly seize the orthodoxy that he had expended so much effort to ensure that the Pavilion of Heavenly Secrets would fall into his hands. The Pope suddenly said, "Position is relative, and so is importance." Qin Changsheng remembered that the phrase position is relative had been written on the first page of Wang Zhiz's notebook. To obtain a balance between position and importance, thus preventing the entire world from dancing with us, is what I have always wanted to do in the last few years. The Pope looked into his eyes and said, "Only this way can the ordinary people living in this world live a little more peacefully." Qin Changsheng understood. In Emperor Xian's later years, the Pope had supported the Divine Empress. This time, he had supported his master and the Chun imperial clan. Now, his master and the imperial court were powerful, so the orthodoxy needed to walk in the opposite direction, the further the better. This was related to emotions and the Tao, but it could also be said to be unrelated. This was an indiscriminate benevolence towards the people of the world, but on a specific matter, it would often seem sticky and uncomfortable. He also understood why his martial uncle had said these things to him. This was a teaching, an inheritance, a guidance from the current pope to his successor. Just because I understand doesn't mean I can do it. Qin Changsheng thought of the storm in the mausoleum of books, the corpses by the road, and the blood and fire in the capital. Perhaps I still haven't learned how to be a powerful person. In the last few days, the synchronization between the world of creation and the starting point has been somewhat problematic. Students who are unable to see the main text of the starting point can come to the world of creation to take a look. Of course, it is rather embarrassing that the updates in the last few days have been rather frequent, making it rather messy. These days will continue for a few more days, so everyone should persevere. Thank you, everyone. Chapter 699. Every person is born a little person. The Pope smiled as he used his hands to measure the length. But people will grow up. There are some things that, as long as one is willing to learn, one can definitely learn. Qin Changsheng was well-versed in the Taoist canon. Whether it was the path of the sword or any other skill, he had always been able to learn them with a single try. His talent and comprehension were both excellent. So what could he not learn? Hearing the Pope's words, he very naturally thought of the conversation he had with the Pope in the library 3 days after the mausoleum of books. But the books of the world were as vast as the sea and knowledge as numerous as the stars. Carpentry, farming, herbalism, tailoring, repairing courtyards. There were many, many things that needed to be learned. Why must one learn how to be a powerful person? What if I don't want to learn? He seriously asked the Pope. Doesn't this mean that I'm not a good candidate for the Pope? The Pope smiled. This deduction naturally has its reasons, but even if you're not willing to learn now, a period of silence is fine. Qin Changsheng did not even think before straightforwardly refusing. I cannot do it because this cannot be a period of time. Master requires my true obedience. The Pope calmly looked into his eyes and asked, "You're not willing, even if it's only on the surface?" In the view of the people of the present day, master and disciple were like father and son. As a student, obeying their teacher was a matter of heaven and earth. As a teacher, if they didn't want you to do something or have you stay silent for a few days, even if they wanted you to be captured or even commit suicide on the spot, you should unhesitatingly accept. This was the duty of a student. Qin Changsheng did not think this way. "Yes, I'm not willing." The Pope asked why. Qin Changsheng had never thought of this question. It was just that on that night, in a mausoleum of books, when he first saw his master and learned of the entire matter, he began to have his own thoughts. Perhaps it's because I don't like the things master does. In other words, you like the Empress's way of doing things? Qin Changsheng shook his head. The Pope asked, "Then why have you made this choice now?" The choice here referred to that day when the sun rose and he carried the Tianhai Divine Empress's body down from the mausoleum of books. It also referred to the sealing of the Orthodox Academy for several days, the defiance of the decree, and the imperial court's inability to do anything to him. The Pope's question was also the question of countless people in the capital. Eunuch Lin had asked it, Sumoyu had asked it, and many people had asked Qin Changsheng. Ever since he had come to the capital from Xining village, he had always been the successor to the orthodoxy, simultaneously living his life in opposition to the Tianhai Divine Empress. There was no affection between him and the Tianhai Divine Empress. He was not crowned Prince Xiaoming, so he was naturally not her son. So why? Qin Changsheng said, The Empress was misled by Master and misunderstood my identity, which is why she took me to be her son, which is why so many things happened in the mausoleum of books that night. If not for the fact that she had to defy the heavens and change his fate, the divine Empress really might have been able to obtain victory in this great upheaval. At the very least, she would have been able to preserve her life. The Pope replied, "Since it was a misunderstanding, her sacrifice was for your senior brother, not for you. There is no need for you to bear this kindness. I understand what you mean, but on a mausoleum of books, at least for a period of time, she truly treated me as her son, cherished me." Chen Changsheng fell silent for a very long time, then said, "I don't know what sort of people my parents were. Since she truly once treated me as her son, I treated her as my mother." The Pope sighed and said no more. Since he treated Tian Hai as his mother, he naturally had to send her off in her place. No one could cross this line. Chen Changsheng continued, "As for Master, since he never treated me as his disciple from the very beginning, I will not recognize him as my master." The Pope smiled at him. Reasonable. Having said the two things he wanted to say the most, Chen Changsheng felt refreshed from inside out and prepared to bid farewell. The Pope glanced at the sky between the eaves and said, "It's about to snow. Remember to bring an umbrella." Chen Changsheng was not very clear on whether these words had any deeper meaning, but he was somewhat worried that this elder that had cared for him so much would become disheartened by his departure. He said to the Pope, "Martial uncle, in the end, the Li Palace still needs a new master. Does Your Holiness not feel that Principal Mao is very suitable?" The Pope looked at him and said, "If you were suitable, then it could be done. How could I let you leave?" Chen Changsheng replied, "I'm not suitable." The Pope smirked at him and asked, "How is it not suitable?" It was impossible to say. Even Chen Changsheng's opponents could not say why he was not suitable to succeed the Pope. He was a legitimate successor of the orthodoxy, well-versed in the Taoist canon, extremely talented, of even higher seniority, and with a pure, calm, and benevolent personality. He was the best candidate for the Pope. In the past, there might have been people who would argue about his age. He was still too young, but now, the South already had a holy maiden that was even younger than him. "I'm too immature, young, and impulsive, easily delaying important matters." Chen Changsheng gazed at the gloomy sky outside the hall and thought about the young and impulsive matter he was about to do in a little while. He was somewhat nervous and uneasy. "This is the reason I chose you." The Pope sighed. "If you are as mature and steady as a block of wood in your youth, then in the future you will at most be a second me. To the orthodoxy, to all living beings, what meaning would that have?" Chen Changsheng understood and seriously said, "Regardless of whether I stay or not, I will diligently cultivate according to Martial Uncle's requirements." The Pope knew that he understood and was very gratified. "If you leave the capital, remember to take my treasure with you." Chen Changsheng followed his gaze and realized that it was that pot of green leaf. Chen Changsheng left the Li Palace. This news once more spread to the entire capital in an extremely short amount of time. The courtyard in the alley of the Northern Military Department was naturally the first place to receive the news. Zhou Tong sat in his palace armchair, his left hand holding a red clay teapot, while his right hand lightly stroked the top of the pot. He looked at the ground and expressionlessly asked, "Where did he go?" Several officials glanced at each other, then said somewhat uncertainly, "All three routes have confirmed that he entered the Wei estate." Upon hearing this, Zhou Tong raised his head and squinted at his subordinates, his voice slightly shrill as he asked, "The Wei estate?" The officials hurriedly replied, "My lord, there is absolutely no mistake." Zhou Tong knew that his subordinates could not be mistaken. It was just that for a moment, he could not remember which estate the Wei estate belonged to. And he could not understand why. After Chen Changsheng had left the Orthodox Academy in the Li Palace, he had not come to the alley of the Northern Military Department to kill him. Just what sort of place was the Wei estate? The Department for Purging officials had not reacted, nor had all the factions of the capital, the Prince of Xiang, the Prince of Zhongshan, Su Shiji, and even the Li Palace. Chen Changsheng had already arrived deep within the Wei estate. Snow had finally fallen from the sky, gradually covering the grass. Just like the face of the master of the Wei estate, it was very pale. Chen Changsheng looked at this person and said, "Greetings, Lord Wei." Lord Wei said in a trembling voice, "Greetings, Principal Chen. For what noble purpose have you come to this lowly official's household?" Chen Changsheng's eyes were very bright, his attitude very proper, his voice very sincere. "I've come to kill you." Those two sentences that Chen Changsheng said to the Pope were what I value the most, because I was worried that there would not be a suitable scene in the future. Even if it was somewhat disruptive, I still placed it before killing Zhou Tong. Chapter 700. Everyone knew that Chen Changsheng was going to kill someone today, so they kept an eye on many places in the capital. The alley of the Northern Military Department was naturally the most important, and even the Imperial Palace was not spared. But no one could have imagined that after he left the Li Palace, he did not go to the alley of the Northern Military Department, did not go to the Imperial Palace, but to the Wei estate. This caught many people off guard, and they had the same doubts as Zhou Tong. What kind of residence was the Wei residence? Why had Chen Changsheng gone here first? Could it be that in his heart, this place was more important than the Imperial Palace and Zhou prison? Then, some people recalled that the current assistant minister of the Ministry of Rights was surnamed Wei, and the wife he had just divorced was surnamed Shui. She was the eldest daughter of the Shui estate. Could this be the reason? Why did Chen Changsheng go to the Wei estate? Avenge the Shui family? Or did he want to persuade Assistant Minister Wei to reconcile with his wife? The moment Assistant Minister Wei recognized Chen Changsheng, he began to nervously ponder the other's intentions and came to a similar conclusion. Chen Changsheng was definitely here to vent the anger of the Shui estate, or perhaps he was here to persuade her to reconcile with Shui Jihua. The word persuade here was, of course, force. Assistant Minister Wei was somewhat angry, but he didn't dare to show it. If he really brought back his second cousin's wife, the Wei household would definitely lose some face, and he would definitely suffer a lot of grievances. But what else could he do? Chen Changsheng was the future pope, his authority and status far above his. He had already prepared himself for Chen Changsheng's request. How should he be nervous and angry, yet not too excited? And how should he reluctantly accept the request without losing his composure? At this moment, Chen Changsheng stated his purpose of coming. His eyes were bright, his attitude was proper, and his voice was sincere. "I came to kill you." Snowflakes fluttered and landed in the courtyard. There was a deathly silence between heaven and earth. Assistant Minister Wei stood in the snow, his face pale. His mouth was slightly open, but for a long time he was unable to speak. It turned out that they were not here to cause trouble, nor were they here to force a marriage. They were here to kill. He was the assistant minister of the Ministry of Rights. In the eyes of ordinary people, he was like an insurmountable mountain, but the young man standing in front of him was a true mountain to him. If the future pope wanted to kill you, who would be willing to save you? There is no other ending for you than death. You should be nervous and angry, but not too agitated. You should reluctantly accept the other party's request without losing your composure and die. No one wanted to die. Although I have done many wrong things, there is no reason for me to die. Assistant Minister Wei stared into Chen Changsheng's eyes. His eyes became exceptionally gloomy, and his breathing became hurried. Yes, neither the laws of the Zhou dynasty nor the scriptures of the church say that banishing one's wife from the court will result in death. If it was in the past, I would definitely not kill you. But now, my way of thinking is different. To redress injustice, one does not need to go overboard, but one must pay the price for doing something wrong. One must be seen by others. You are ungrateful. I want to tell the world and believers that what you did was wrong. Finally, Chen Changsheng said, "In punishing the ugly is to praise the beautiful." When he said this, his eyes were very bright, and his tone was very serious. He wasn't lying. He wasn't deliberately mocking the other party. He wasn't trying to humiliate the other party before he died. That was what he really thought. He came to the Wei Manor to kill people because he hoped that there would be fewer incidents like this in the future. An unnatural flush appeared on Assistant Minister Wei's pale face, and his body began to tremble. He didn't know what to say. In the eyes of a normal person like him, the current Chen Changsheng was a madman who would pay the price of death for something like divorcing one's wife. Even if he was ungrateful, fickle, and had a heart of steel. But why did he have to die? His wife's clan, and the wife he divorced, if nothing unexpected happened, would indeed be killed by the imperial court. But what did that have to do with him? If this was an excuse to kill, then so be it. But it wasn't. This was the reason why Chen Changsheng killed. The brighter his eyes were, the more serious his tone was. In the eyes of a normal person, the crazier he was. Assistant Minister Wei looked at the courtyard wall in the snow. He wanted to find a way to survive, but he found it was futile. He felt hopeless for the rest of his life and cried out in pain. The snow fell on the paper, making a very soft sound. It was very crisp, like the sound of something beautiful being torn apart. It was a piece of paper as white as the first snow. There were a few black holes on it. It looked abnormally terrifying. A voice came from one of the black holes. Everyone says I'm a madman, but I think you're even crazier than me. Many people knew that Painted Armor Xiao Zhang had a violent personality and that there were some mental problems. But at the beginning of this winter, when he saw Chen Changsheng open his bright eyes and use a serious tone to describe his killing intent to Assistant Minister Wei, he felt an extremely strange feeling. He felt that Chen Changsheng was the madman, a serious madman. This made him very surprised. When Chen Changsheng saw Xiao Zhang behind the tree, he was also shocked. In the entire capital, no one knew that he would come to the Wei estate. Presumably, many people were hurrying over, so why was Xiao Zhang waiting here for him? How come you're here? He asked in shock. At the same time, that extremely cold and unsullied dagger had already pierced through Assistant Minister Wei's sleeve, and the shock between the three people, arriving in front of Assistant Minister Wei's throat. Xiao Zhang's face was covered by a piece of white paper, so he naturally had no expression. But everyone who saw this white paper seemed to see disdain. This disdain was naturally directed at Chen Changsheng's dagger. It was like a soundless, strange laugh, brimming with ridicule. You actually dare to kill someone in front of me? The spear broke through the flying snow, his clothes moving in tandem, breaking through the cold to cleave apart the world. With just a thought, the cold tip of the spear was about to clash with Chen Changsheng's dagger. No matter how talented Chen Changsheng was, even if he had defeated Eunuch Lin in the Orthodox Academy, how could he be a match for Xiao Zhang in a direct clash of sword and spear? In the next moment, Xiao Zhang's spear would shatter Chen Changsheng's dagger. He would stand in front of Assistant Minister Wei. The first assassination on this day of the capital's first snowfall would come to an end. Even at this moment, it seemed like this was a matter of course. But there would always be surprises. Like today, the white paper on Xiao Zhang's face flapped, the unspoken ridicule and disdain vanishing without a trace. The soundless, strange laugh became a real, strange cry, resounding through the entire Zhou estate and tearing through the snowy sky. The spear's trajectory had subtly deviated. It had failed to stab the dagger. The cold dagger flew through the air, bringing with it a stream of blood. The blood rushed into the flying snow, transforming into a beautiful scene. An object flew through the air, howling as it spun at high speeds. Then it fell, sending up a few wisps of snow. It was Assistant Minister Wei's head, his eyes still open. Xiao Zhang suddenly raised his head and looked forward. His face suddenly chilled as if he had seen an abyss. A blue-clothed man had appeared at the gate of the Wei estate. This person's eyebrows were slightly drooping, and he appeared extremely distressed and unwilling. In his bosom was a sheathed blade. Chapter 701. Wang Po of Tianliang had finally appeared in the capital. Seeing the blue-clothed man outside the door, Chen Changsheng finally understood why he had encountered Xiao Zhang here. The people in the world that understood you the most were often not your friends, but your enemies. This was a very cliché, and it was also a very cliché that was often correct. In the entire capital, no one could have imagined that Wang Po would come to the Wei estate. Only Xiao Zhang had. So he had infiltrated the Wei estate and waited, but he had not expected that Chen Changsheng would be the first to arrive. Wang Po looked at Chen Changsheng in the snow, somewhat surprised. and then he broke into a smile. With this smile, his drooping brows rose like the sunlight piercing through the clouds, inspiring admiration. So you were also here. This sort of coincidental feeling was very good. Chen Changsheng and Wang Pe truly were kindred spirits. The paths they walked were often the same, and the places they went were often the same. Whether it was the abyss brimming with the shadow of death, the divine kingdom above the sea of stars, the heavily guarded imperial palace, or the unknown Wei estate, none of it mattered. Wang Pu extended an invitation to Chen Changsheng. Together, okay. Without hesitation, Chen Changsheng accepted this invitation and began to walk out of the estate. With a slight shake of his right hand, a drop of blood fell from his sword into the snow like a plum blossom. Xiao Zhang was furious. He yelled at the pair, "Hey!" His hand gripping his spear, he stood in the snow, a brazen and fierce aura soaring into the sky. But Wang Pe did not even glance at him. Chen Changsheng turned his head to glance at him, clasped his hands in greeting, and then turned to continue forward. Wang Po's disregard and Chen Changsheng's indifference made it impossible for Xiao Zhang to control his emotions. He yelled, "Ayaya! I'm going to die from anger." His cry was very unpleasant, hoarse, and somewhat shrill. It was like a crow that had not been able to drink water for many days in the desert. At this moment, Chen Changsheng had already walked out of the Wei estate and stood next to Wang Pe. Hearing Xiao Zhang's strange cries, Wang Po's brows drooped once more. He asked somewhat helplessly, "Just what do you want to do?" Ever since he was very young, he had often sparred with geniuses like Xiao Zhang, Liang Wang's son, Sun Mei, and Xiao De. Sometimes it was in the grand examination, sometimes it was in the boiling stone summit, sometimes it was in the garden of Zhou, sometimes it was in the mausoleum of books, sometimes it was in Blue Pass, sometimes it was in Xuanyang City. Although they were rivals and enemies, in terms of familiarity, they were even more familiar than family. "What do I want to do?" "Of course, I want to fight you," Xiao Zhang shouted in a low voice. The white paper on his face fluttered in the wind and snow. It was a shocking scene. However, Wang Pe remained calm, even somewhat stiff. He didn't feel as if he was facing a great enemy. No one knew what he was thinking, but he thought about it seriously for a while. Then he said to Xiao Zhang, "You can't beat me." This was the truth, so it hurt even more. Xiao Zhang was furious. His right hand seemed to want to break the iron spear that he was holding. Without waiting for him to make a move, Wang Pe continued, "Moreover, I have other matters to attend to today. If you insist on making a move, I might not hold back." Xiao Zhang was so angry that he laughed and said in a hoarse voice, "Have you been merciful in the past 20 years? Wang Pe replied, "In the past, even if I didn't hold back, it would still have been very difficult to kill you on the spot, but today is different." Xiao Zhang shouted, "What's different?" Wang Pe replied, "Right now, there are two of us. You will die." Xiao Zhang's breathing stagnated. This was still the truth, so it was still very hurtful and difficult to answer. Xiao Zhang truly had not expected that Chen Changsheng would appear in the Wei estate. If it was Wang Pe, even if he was no match, he would not be afraid. If it was Chen Changsheng, he had absolute confidence that he could defeat him with his spear. But if his opponents were Wang Pe and Chen Changsheng, then he truly had no chance of victory, and there really was a chance that he would die. However, this was not in line with Wang Po's way of doing things, just like how he had vanished without a trace upon entering the capital. He looked at Wang Pe and shouted, "You're actually willing to join hands with someone?" Wang Pe replied, "I've already joined hands with him in Xuanyang City. Moreover, what I want to do today is rather important." "I can't let you stop me," Xiao Zhang asked. "Just what are you going to do? You should be well aware that as long as you walk on the street, everyone will come to kill you." "I'm going to kill Zhou Tong." Wang Po's reply was very calm and unperturbed. "I thought that you already knew." From the moment Wang Po appeared, Chen Changsheng had said nothing. Although his current status was not one bit lower than Wang Po's or Xiao Zhang's, out of respect for his seniors, he was willing to maintain his silence. Xiao Zhang did not leave him behind, asking, "And why do you insist on killing Zhou Tong?" Chen Changsheng's reply was very serious. "Just like killing Assistant Minister Wei." Only by doing this can I tell the world that doing this is wrong, so that these kinds of people and matters will appear less often. On the side, Wang Po was very pleased to hear this, saying, correct. Being ungrateful is wrong, and selling out one's master for glory is also wrong. Since you've done something wrong, you have to pay the price. Selling out? The Tianhai Empress is no good person, so why haven't any of you come to kill her? Xiao Zhang sneered. Wang Po replied, because I'm not confident in killing Tianhai, so I don't have the courage. Xiao Zhang asked, now you have the confidence to kill Zhou Tong? Wang Po replied, yes, because my blade is even faster. Xiao Zhang harshly rebuked, where's all this reasoning coming from? In order to live, is there anything that can't be done? You have your reasoning, and we have ours. What if the two sides conflict? I didn't understand it before, but it's only recently that I've understood. Wang Po looked into his eyes and seriously said, if we kill you, then our reasoning will naturally win. Chen Chongsheng replied, it's precisely this reasoning. Xiao Zhang was quiet for a while, then said, it sounds rather reasonable. Wang Po calmly said, if you agree with this reasoning, then don't try to keep us here, or else we really will kill you. Xiao Zhang stared into his eyes and said, in these past several decades, in countless battles, you've never said so much to me. Wang Po replied, because I want to convince you. Xiao Zhang asked, why do you want to convince me? Wang Po replied, because this way I won't need to use my blade against you. Several dozen days ago, the entire continent knew that he had left Scholatry Manor and come to the capital. From that time until now, he had not used a single blade. His blade intent had already accumulated to an unimaginable level. If Xiao Zhang were to use his spear, he would certainly not be a match for this blade. But he was not confident that he could walk very far on the streets of the capital. In the snowstorm, Wang Po and Chen Chongsheng walked on the street, one in front and one behind. They did not walk shoulder to shoulder, because Chen Chongsheng had insisted that he was not worthy. It was like they had returned to Xuanyang City. They had also been one in front, one behind, facing off against an expert of the divine domain, their bodies bathed in blood, unwilling to rest until death. But at that time, they had been breaking out of an encirclement, while today they were going to kill. Chapter 702. Snow drifted down the streets, and ice covered the water. The capital at the beginning of winter was so quiet and quiet. Wang Po and Chen Chongsheng walked along the Luo River. The streets were empty, only the incessant fall of snow as if it had been falling for 10 years. In the houses lining the streets, behind the walls, on the boats on the Luo River, behind the bridges, and in the gloomy world, countless people were hidden. These people came from the provinces, the princely estates, the ministries, and the governments. There were government laborers, bailiffs, officials, servants, heroes, and men. Yet even as the ice was gradually softened by the winter sun and the withered willows lightly swayed, no one moved. The two figures in the snow were not disturbed in the slightest. Because the experts of the imperial court had not appeared, how could these government laborers, bailiffs, and servants dare to act first? As for those experts of the provinces who consider themselves heroes, how could they have the face to act against Wang Po and Chen Chongsheng? The assassination of the current Assistant Minister of Rights was a massive crime. The Great Zhou Imperial Court had enough reason to order Wang Po's arrest, so the oath to the starry sky was over. The Imperial Court also had reason to demand an explanation from Chen Chongsheng and the Li Palace. The capital was already under martial law. Outside the alley of the Northern Military Department, that man exuding a cold aura of iron had already opened his eyes. Even now, the Imperial Court had not made any move. There was naturally another reason. In front of the Baoha Pagoda, the Imperial Guard that had long since been ready to move out had been blocked by the Orthodoxy cavalry. The two black tides of cavalry could clash at any moment. In front of the City Gate Department, the teachers and students of the Five Ivies were everywhere. Su Shurji's face was ashen, but he could not order the cavalry to charge out. In the snow, Wang Po and Chen Chongsheng continued to walk, occasionally stopping to say a few words to the cold willows and snowy shores, just like true tourists. Where had they gone, What had they done? What had happened in various places? And why had no one stopped them even now? In the shortest amount of time, this information was gathered in that courtyard that had once been covered in crabapple blossoms, but now only had withered branches. Zhou Tong sat in his palace armchair, his crimson official's robe growing darker and darker, like real blood, his face growing paler and paler, like real snow. The entire capital was currently watching those two people on the banks of the Luo River. The entire world knew that those two people had come here to kill him. Logically speaking, even if those two were Wang Pe and Chun Changsheng, they should not have been able to reach the alley of the Northern Military Department. But today's situation was a little strange. The Li Palace seemed to really want to follow Chun Changsheng in his madness. There were also many people watching from the sidelines, as if they were watching a show. Snowflakes fell from the eaves of the Li Palace, drawing a white pattern on the black ground. A woman exuding an air of nobility stood in the middle of the white pattern. She thought of the first and last snowman she had made in the great Western continent's imperial palace when she was young, thought of the aggrieved look on her daughter's face before she left. She did not soften because of this, and instead, her tone became increasingly unyielding. Logically speaking, as an outsider, I should just watch from the sidelines. But if something really happens, it will affect the northern expedition. The Pope looked at her and asked, "So Madame Mu has come to see me?" This noble lady had the surname Mu because she was a princess of the great Western continent. Even the Pope and the previous Tianhai Divine Empress were used to calling her Madame Mu. She had an even more impressive identity, the Demon Queen, a true saint. Thus, even in the face of the Supreme Pope, she had no intention of backing down. "Could it be that you wish for me to see Chun Changsheng?" The Pope replied, "Perhaps you should go see Shang." Madame Mu arched her brows. "Right now, it's him and Wang Pe who want to kill." The Pope replied, "We'll talk after we've killed them." Madame Mu had not expected this answer. Her voice chilled as she asked, "The youths are making trouble. Why must my holiness interfere?" Everyone started out young. And is Wang Pe an ordinary young man? No, is he Qin Changsheng? Also not. He is my successor, your daughter's teacher. The Pope's smile gradually faded as he slowly said, "You should hope that he succeeds." Madame Mu suddenly said, "The demi-human race has never asked my holiness to do anything." A light suddenly flashed through the Pope's elderly eyes, somewhat dazzling, somewhat sharp. Madame Mu's expression did not change. "My holiness understand what I mean." The Pope indifferently said, "I know what you are worried about. If I really did not care about the greater good, Zhou Tong would have died 300 years ago." This was already a promise, but Madame Mu clearly felt that it was not enough. "Then who sent the orthodoxy cavalry?" The Pope sighed and no longer answered this question. He turned and walked into the depths of the palace. Mao Qiu had appeared at some point and politely extended his arm to Madame Mu. "My holiness, this way, please." The stance of the demi-humans and the great Western continent could not change the Pope's mind. But just as the Pope had said, he had always placed the greatest importance on the greater good. In the capital in the early snow, the Li Palace resolved many problems for Wang Pe and Chun Changsheng, allowing the long street to remain deserted and empty for even longer. However, not a single important figure of the orthodoxy would lend a hand. If that happened, the orthodoxy and the imperial court would truly shed all pretense of cordiality. Just as Madame Mu feared, it would affect the future northern expedition against the demons. Madame Mu was not very satisfied with the situation before her. She did not want Wang Pe and Chun Changsheng's madness to succeed, nor did she want them to die. The imperial court had long since made preparations, assuredly hiding countless experts in the alley of the Northern Military Department. Crucially, Tai Shu would assuredly appear. No matter how one looked at it, Wang Pe and Chun Changsheng were doomed. Many people thought this way. Thus, when they saw those two figures walking along the deserted street amidst the drifting snow, they could always see a stirring and tragic aura. The wind was bleak and the Luo River was cold. Wang Pe and Chun Changsheng did not feel this way. As they walked along the Luo River, They talked about old matters that had been buried in old papers, like how Wang Jitsa had been in the past, the changes that had occurred in the last few years, like how the Bridge of Helplessness had been struck several times by ships last year. They walked and chatted, treading the snow without seeking plum blossoms, looking around without arrogance. They only raised and lowered their steps, naturally adjusting themselves, gradually becoming one with the world. Then, they walked to the alley of the Northern Military Department. They saw no tide of cavalry, no torrential rain of ballista bolts. On this deserted and empty street, they saw only one person. This person exuded a cold aura, a sharpness hidden in his clothes. He did not share the world of snow, and seemed to have the will to transcend the mortal world. This was an expert of the divine domain. Tai Shu has an extremely profound cultivation. He does not use subtlety to win, only strength. In terms of fighting strength, he can be ranked in the top 3 of the storms of the 8 directions. Wampa said to Chen Changsheng, back in Xuanyang City, when he and Chen Changsheng worked together to fight Zhu Luo, they had no chance of victory, not even the slightest chance. The Tai Shu that had appeared on the snowy street today had a cultivation similar to Zhu Luo's, and he was even younger. His qi, blood, and were at their peak. Just as Wang Pa had commented, in terms of pure fighting strength, Tai Shu, Biyang Hong, and that other old monster were the strongest. Even if the Elder of Heavenly Secrets were resurrected, he would not necessarily be stronger in this aspect. Today, they had to face precisely this sort of person. Tai Shu was not standing on the street, but sitting at a table on the side of the street. There were several chairs at the table. Let's part ways here. Okay, I'll go sit for a while. Okay. This simple conversation concluded. Chen Changsheng and Wang Pa parted on the street. Wang Pa walked to the side of the street. Chen Changsheng walked to the courtyard at the end of the street. Wang Pa wanted to sit at that table. He sat down for a while. He wanted to meet Tai Shu. Although he was at the top of the proclamation of liberation, the unquestionable number 1 expert of the younger generation, he was still far from a legendary expert like Tai Shu. However, no one dared to say that he would definitely lose. Because he was Wang Pa, his family was ruined, and he wandered to Tam Sui, then to Tiannan. He spent his entire life fighting against fate, whether it was the Great Zhou Imperial Court or an expert like Zhu Luo. Up until today, he hadn't really won a match, but he hadn't lost either. Wang Pa of Tianliang was best at fighting the strong with the weak. The courtyard at the end of the street was once filled with crabapple blossoms, but tonight it was covered in snow. Chen Changsheng walked towards that direction. His expression was calm, his steps were steady, his breathing was steady, and his heart was at ease. He knew that this courtyard was assuredly hiding many assassins, killers, experts, and even the upper-level star condensation Lord Zhou Tong. But he was not afraid, because he had been here before. He hadn't been able to kill Zhou Tong that time, but he would definitely be able to today. He was confident that he could take Zhou Tong's head from the army of 10,000, because the Tao he cultivated and the sword he learned had always made him a match for 10,000. It was just that other than that time, when he returned south from the wastelands and killed someone in the tea shop, he had never had the chance to show it to the world. The orthodoxy's Chen Changsheng was best at fighting the many alone. Chapter 703. Snowflakes drifted down from the sky, falling on Tai Shu's hair and clothes. Though they did not actually touch, they were cut into countless pieces with an extremely soft whooshing sound, blooming into countless flowers. This man seemed to be made of metal, even colder than the snowstorm. His clothes concealed countless edges, even more terrifying than sabers and spears. Wang Pa walked up to the table, glanced at him, then sat down and calmly placed his blade on the table. His movements were very steady, very light, making no sound, just like the noiseless fall of snow. Snowflakes also fell on his hair and clothes, either rolling down or lightly sticking to them. Then they fell on the blade, and like falling yellow leaves, they gradually covered the sheath, not revealing the slightest edge. At this sight, Tai Shu's indifferent expression gradually began to change. It was not wariness, not solemnity, but sorrow. In Tanja Temple, when he had closed his eyes amidst the yellow leaves, he had also seen a similar sight. He looked at the current Wang Pe, but in his eyes was the figure of that plain-clothed youth who had walked out of Wenshui City. "Today, I might talk a little more," he said to Wang Pe. Wang Pe looked at the courtyard on the other side of the snowstorm, his meaning clear. Tai Shu indifferently said, "Chen Changsheng cannot succeed, so I have a very long time." Wang Pe had a different view, but it was precisely because of this that he naturally did not mind sitting a little longer. "Senior, please speak. When you left Wenshui City, many people went to see you." Hearing this, Wang Pe's drooping eyebrows slightly raised and then fell back down. As the last male descendant of the Wang clan of Tianliang County, if he died, the Wang clan would truly be destroyed. Emperor Taizong's joke from back then would come true. Thus, he had been in hiding ever since he was a child, arduously growing up with the help of the Liang household and a few warm-hearted seniors. The Zhu clan was simply too powerful, and after he gained the reputation of being a cultivation genius, he faced an even more dangerous situation. It was also at this time that the Tang old master sent someone to receive him into Wenshui City. He worked as an accountant in Wenshui for several years, protected by the Tang clan. Several years later, he decided to leave Wenshui, and the Tang old master agreed to his decision. This news quickly spread throughout the entire continent. The fact that Wang Pe dared to leave Wenshui and escape the protection of the Tang clan meant that, after several years as an accountant, he had already matured to the point where he had sufficient confidence. As long as Zhu Luo was restrained by his oath to the starry sky and could not personally act, or if the imperial court did not mobilize an army or a large force, it would be very difficult to kill him. Everyone knew that Wang Pe was very strong now, but just how strong was he? On the day he left Wenshui City, many people went to the official road outside the city, including a few important figures. Everyone was well aware that the Zhu clan, the emotion-severing sect, and the imperial court would all move against Wang Pe. On that day, there would certainly be a great commotion outside Wenshui City. "I'm going too," Tai Shu said, looking into his eyes. This was the first time Wang Pe had heard of this matter. "I didn't expect it," he said. Logically speaking, he was just a young cultivating genius with some potential. No matter what, he should have found it very difficult to alarm an expert of the divine domain like Tai Shu. Because when Su Li saw you in Wenshui City, he gave you an evaluation. Others may not know, but we naturally do. Tai Shu said, "He said that your saber will definitely be stronger than your predecessors in the future." Wang Pe said nothing at these words. Even he could only remain silent in the face of this sort of praise. To a person like Su Li, there was only one predecessor who used the saber that was worthy of him specifically mentioning, and that was naturally Zhou Dufu. "So I thought that you would definitely die that day." Tai Shu continued to speak. This was a reasoning that sounded unreasonable, but it was actually a matter of course. Even Su Li had praised him in such a manner. So how could the important figures of the imperial court and Tianliang County allow him to continue growing? Wang Pe recalled the scene when he walked out of Wenshui City, and his two brows gradually rose. It was not complacency or pride, nor was it nostalgia for glory. It was just that after so many years, he still could not forget that overwhelming killing intent. "I watched you walk out of Wenshui City alone with a saber, just like today." Tai Shu continued, "Many people died, but you still lived. At that time, we knew that the Zhu clan and the imperial court had encountered a very big problem. Now that I think about it, Zhu Luo himself was even more aware of it, which is why that night rain in Xuanyang City occurred, and why those last words were spoken in front of the Mausoleum of Books." Wang Pe calmly replied, "I do not regard my regard for him as some sort of glory." Tai Shu continued, "But in the end, he was Zhu Luo. Before his death, he had only one request, and we had to help him fulfill it." Wang Pe's gaze slightly lowered, resting on the metal saber covered in light snow. "Of course, as I watched you walk this path, I also sighed. I do not want to kill you." Tai Shu continued, "But you should not have entered the capital. This was seeking your own death." Wang Pe once more thought of the past, and also sighed. Then he dusted off his sleeves, letting the snow drift down. Tidying his sleeves was naturally to hold his saber. Tai Shu indifferently asked, "Must you die today?" Wangpa did not answer this question. He said, "In truth, I'm very curious. Just who in this world can make you suddenly change your mind?" Silence. The snow still fell without sound. Tai Shu's sighs of the past were all true, but what he said was false. From Tanja Temple to today, his desire to kill Wangpa had never changed. Wangpa was keenly aware of this point, but Tai Shu's meaning just now had been crystal clear. As long as Wangpa was willing to leave the capital, he would not act. Who was it that made him change his mind from killing to expelling? Wangpa would not leave, but he truly wanted to know the answer. To be able to influence the mind of an expert of the divine domain was not something an ordinary powerful figure could do. Across the entire continent, there were probably no more than 5 people capable of such a feat. With a creak, the door to a tea house on the side of the street was pushed open. A very handsome man walked out. Smiling at Wangpa, he said, "Long time no see." Seeing this person, Wangpa's raised brows slowly lowered. So it was Second Master. This handsome man used to be the most famous hedonistic son of Wenshui City, but later on, he gradually became nameless. Only the people of the Wenshui Tangs knew just how frightening this person was. The Tang's Second Master. Wangpa had lived in the Wenshui Tangs, so did he know this? It was the Wenshui Tangs. Only the Wenshui Tangs could make an important figure like Tai Shu, even under the pressure of the imperial court and Shangxingzhou, change his mind. The Tang's Second Master smiled at Wangpa. "You know it's me, but do you still persist?" This man truly was very handsome, but perhaps because of the wind and snow, he gave off a gloomy and cold feeling. Wangpa said nothing. The Tang's Second Master continued to smile as he asked, "Kindness as weighty as a mountain. Are these 4 words?" Wangpa was quiet for a while, then replied, "Correct." The Tang's Second Master opened his mouth and smiled, seeming incomparably happy, but no laughter came out. In the wind and snow, it made one's heart palpitate. Then his smile gradually faded, and he expressionlessly said to Wangpa, "Today, you are not allowed to use your blade." Chapter 704. The surface of the street was covered in a thin layer of snow, and a clear trail of footprints could be seen in the snow. Qin Changsheng had already reached the end of the street. Turning right, he arrived at the alley of the Northern Military Department. 10 some zhang away, he could see a courtyard wall. Behind the wall was the courtyard. There had been no sound. Behind him, the sound of sabers or battle. But his mind was not affected in the slightest, because he believed in Wangpa. As long as Wangpa was behind him, even when facing a legendary expert like Tai Shu, he only needed to look in front of him. That courtyard wall, as well as the courtyard behind it. There was a howl of wind, somewhat ear-piercing. The thin snow on the street was swept up, the snow falling from the eaves of the houses on either side. There was the sound of rushing wind, chaotically circling about. It was very normal. A figure broke through the snow. A sword broke through the figure, stabbing at his forehead. Even though he was several zhang away, Qin Changsheng could still sense the sharpness and aura of death attached to the sword. He slightly narrowed his eyes, not because of the sword, but because of the figure itself. Flying snow flew up from the fluttering sleeves, and a few fragments of light were faintly discernible. This assassin that had been hidden in the snow for so long did not seem to be in the flying snow, but in another world. This was because this assassin had his own world. Those bright fragments of light were proof of this. The first enemy Qin Changsheng encountered today was a star condensation assassin. Star condensation cultivators were powerful figures in the counties and elders of the various sections. Who would be willing to be an assassin that could not see the light? Assassins of this level were extremely rare. Not even the department for purging officials had too many. In the entire continent, there was only one place that had many. It was a very obscure assassin organization. Suli had once been a member of it. No one knew the origins or location of this assassin organization. But Qin Changsheng knew. This assassin organization was actually under the control of the Pavilion of Heavenly Secrets. The moment he saw this star condensation assassin and saw that very familiar style of assassination, he was certain of his origins. The imperial court had truly succeeded in subduing the Pavilion of Heavenly Secrets. Qin Changsheng was not surprised, but began to worry about Lu Qing. Then he focused his mind on his eyes, focused on his heart, and retreated. With just a simple step back, the cold sword hidden in the wind and snow missed its target. As his boots broke through the thin layer of snow, there was a clang as the stainless sword left its sheath, no longer hiding its edge. Snow and wind filled his eyes, making it impossible for him to see where the assassin was. But his line of sight had always been fixed on a certain place in the wind and snow, without the slightest hesitation. The sword intent of the stainless sword followed his gaze and pierced forward. There was a soft sound. A jet of blood spurted out from the messy snow. The assassin's figure was forced out by his sword intent, and he kept retreating until he finally crashed heavily into the wall of the courtyard. The snow on top of the wall rustled down and fell on the assassin's face before it was washed away by the gushing blood. A deep bloody hole appeared on the assassin's throat. His eyes were filled with frustration and despair. He couldn't understand how Qin Changsheng could determine his position. Even if he could see it, how could his sword so easily destroy his star domain? Of course, Qin Changsheng could break this assassin's star domain, because he used the intellectual sword and had a pair of all-seeing eyes. At present, his true essence was as thick as a mountain, his spiritual sense as calm and supple as the sea, and his swordplay was extremely brilliant. His current level of cultivation might still be somewhat lacking when compared to those true experts, but in terms of insight and the level of the sword, he had long since reached a certain height. From a certain perspective, he could look down on all opponents of the same level of cultivation. This assassin was also at the star condensation realm, but his cultivation was inferior, and the assassination techniques he used were from Su Li and Lu Qing's lineage. How could he block his sword? Blood melted into the snow, mixing into a rather disgusting paste. The assassin slid down from the wall and died sitting there. Qin Changsheng continued to walk forward. His steps were still steady and gentle, his expression still calm, and he seemed very cautious. One strike to kill a powerful foe had still consumed a great deal of his mind. More importantly, he knew that the battle had only just begun. The imperial court had subdued the Pavilion of Heavenly Secrets, so there were assuredly even more experts in this courtyard than he had calculated. He was not Zhou Dufu, nor was he Su Li. Right now, he could barely see Wang Po's back, so how could he be called invincible? That night, he had been able to charge into that courtyard and kill Zhou Tong until his soul scattered because he had taken advantage of the element of surprise. Today, it naturally would not be so simple. He knew that today, he would assuredly encounter an opponent that he could not defeat. This was the proper meaning. In the end, he was still too young, having cultivated for less than 3 years. There were many experts in the world that could rely on their cultivation to forcefully crush him, making it impossible for him to display his insight and the level of the sword. Like Zhou Tong, who would no longer underestimate his foe, who would not allow any accidents to occur. Like those powerful men at the top of the Proclamation of Liberation. Xiao De, who had just appeared in front of him. Fifth on the Proclamation of Liberation, the strongest expert of the demi-human race's middle generation, Xiao De. Seeing him walk out of the snow, a hint of respect appeared in Xiao De's eyes, no longer as disdainful as when they first met in Mount Han. Today, I will send you on your way. Qin Changsheng knew that in the coup of the Mausoleum of Books, Xiao De and Xiao Zhang had played extremely important roles in the imperial palace. He should not have been surprised that Xiao De would respond to the imperial court's request to deal with him, but he truly was rather surprised. White Emperor City's diplomatic mission was still in the capital. No matter how he looked at it, Xiao De would not act, unless he suddenly felt that the cold in the snowstorm was becoming more and more real. There was still no sound from the street, the sound of blades or battle. Wang Po had still not unsheathed his blade. Countless figures appeared in the snowstorm, all of them experts. Presumably, there were even more assassins and killers hiding in the shadows. Chun Changsheng gazed at the courtyard in front of him in silence. Because he understood. The courtyard was so close, but he might not be able to enter it today. At this moment, he could only see a few scenes in the courtyard, like that white line on the top of the wall and the crabapple tree poking out of it. The crabapple tree had long ago shed all its leaves, its bare branches bearing the weight of snow. It seemed very cold and withered. A deathly stillness. When the Shui's second master noiselessly laughed, he seemed rather comical. And in the eyes of his opponents, his face was actually very terrifying. When the Shui's second master stopped smiling and became expressionless, he was at his most gloomy and cold, like a dead man. Wang Pe gazed at this unforgettable, handsome, comical, terrifying, gloomy, and ugly face that he had not seen for many years, and he suddenly felt an intense desire. When he was an accountant in Wenshui City, he would often feel this desire, but because of those 4 words he had always endured. Kindness as weighty as a mountain truly could be summed up in those 4 words. The Wenshui Tangs had treated him with kindness as weighty as a mountain. When this mountain came crashing down, what could one do? Wang Pe had never thought about this question. His blade was straight, and his view of the world was also straight. Hatred had to be avenged, kindness had to be repaid. There was no need to think about such a simple matter. Until today, when he heard the Shui second master say those words. You're not allowed to unsheath your blade. His brow drooped, appearing very distressed as he asked, Whose idea was this? The Shui second master understood what he meant and replied, Of course it was the old master's idea. Wang Pe silently looked at him. The Shui second master mocked, If it was my idea, why would I block your blade? I would be especially happy to watch you die at Tai Shu's hands. Wang Pe thought this over, then replied, Correct. The Shui's second master continued, But the old master loves you like a grandson. He doesn't want you to die, so he had me say these words. Wang Pe fell silent once more. Just now, you must have felt that our Tang clan was preparing to use kindness to repay you, that it was very shameless. The Shui's second master stared into his eyes, his malice not concealed in the slightest. Now that you realize that the Tang clan is actually trying to protect your life and that you can't look down on us merchants, don't you feel very sad? Wang Pe calmly gazed at him and said, Since you want me to die, you can pretend that you never said these words today. Although I want you to die, I also don't want you to die like this, to die without any value. The Shui clan's second master looked at him and said mockingly, I don't care what the old master thinks. I only know that my Tang clan has paid a great price for you. You are a commodity of my Tang clan, a business that my Tang clan has invested in. Even if you have to die, you have to earn enough money for my Tang clan. How can you die for such an inexplicable reason? There is no such thing as a hero or a warrior, or the vicissitudes of the righteous path. It was truly inexplicable. If you want to die, you should die with value. How could you mess around with that child? Then what was valuable? Wang Pe understood. The position of Pope was the most valuable thing in the world. After going around in circles, bits and pieces, in the end, it had all been this matter. In the eyes of many people, the day of the first snow in the capital was the day that he and Chun Changsheng killed Zhou Tong. But in the eyes of others, it was the day that Chun Changsheng died. Chapter 705. Yesterday, I wrote the Tang second master as the Shui second master. Recently, my physical and mental strength truly have reached a certain level. I try to change it, but because this is the new edition of the author's section, I don't know how to use it, so I don't know if I succeeded or not. It's still the same sentence. Recently, my physical and mental strength. Okay, just now, I confirmed that the change was successful. Wang Pe understood. They wanted to kill Zhou Tong. They wanted to kill him and Chun Changsheng. The Wenshui Tang's choice had been based on their different attitudes towards him and Chun Changsheng, resulting in some deviation. But there were still 2 things that he did not understand. If the Tang clan was purely a merchant, putting profit above all else, then why did the Tang clan want Chun Changsheng dead? Everyone knew that Chun Changsheng and Tang were close friends. If he succeeded as Pope, It would be of enormous benefit to the Tang clan. White Emperor City also does not agree to Qin Changsheng succeeding as pope. This is also a question that many people do not understand. The Tang second master explained that is because White Emperor City has a better choice, and to my Tang clan, Qin Changsheng is admittedly the best choice, but to me, he is the worst choice. The one on good terms with Qin Changsheng was Tang Tang, not the Wenshui Tangs, and certainly not the Tang second master. Wang Pa asked, "This being the case, why would the old master listen to you?" The Tang second master replied, "You know that the old master dislikes the divine empress the most. The things Qin Changsheng does make the old master extremely unhappy." At this moment, the clear cry of a sword came from the snowstorm at the end of the street, and then there was the glow of a sword. Qin Changsheng's figure was faintly discernible in the snowstorm. With a groan, the stench of blood penetrated the snowstorm and arrived at this place. The battle had already begun, but Wang Po's blade remained unmoved on the table. His gaze retracted from the distance and fell upon the snow-covered blade. "You can't even wait 10 some days?" The entire continent knew that the Pope's illness was getting worse and worse. With the arrival of autumn and the arrival of winter, with the arrival of the season, it was already the last 10 some days. The great Zhou imperial court, White Emperor City, and the Wenshui Tangs. Even if they wanted to seize the position of Pope, why couldn't they wait 10 some days? His Holiness the Pope is a saint. At the moment of his death, lightning will assuredly follow him, and he will make arrangements. The Tang second master said, "What we need to do is disrupt his plans and use the simplest method to resolve the most complicated problems in the future." Even if the Pope returned to the Sea of Stars and the entire world knew of his arrangements, who would dare oppose him? Once the orthodoxy was united in will, even someone as strong as Shang Xingzhou or as scheming as the Wenshui Tangs would find it very difficult to drive Qin Changsheng out of the Li Palace. Killing Qin Changsheng ahead of time would definitely be countless times simpler than waiting for him to sit on the seat of Pope. From the looks of it, this was the most correct solution, but before this solution appeared, no one would have thought of this. No one could have imagined that just before the Pope was about to leave this world, not only would Shang Xingzhou not have the patience to wait, he would insist on acting before he left this world. Whose decision was this? Wang Pa asked the Tang second master. "Master." "Tang master have I young master." Master said, "Master, I master said." Wang Pa looked into his eyes and said, "After so many years, you still like to play these tricks." "Correct, because this is the only thing I'm good at," the Tang second master said, his smile fading. Many years ago, the current principal of the Heavenly Tao Academy, Zhuang Jihuan, had seen him in Wenshui. From then until now, Zhuang Jihuan had always marveled at his talent in cultivation, marveled even more at how he would waste it. In the entire world, only the Tang old master understood why he cared so little for his precious talent in cultivation, casting it aside like a pair of worn-out shoes. Because no matter how high his talent in cultivation was, it could never surpass Wang Pa. No matter how diligently he cultivated, he could never surpass Wang Pa. Many years ago, he had reluctantly and despairingly recognized this fact. Thus, the once promising Tang second master had become a hedonistic hedonist of Wenshui City, gradually becoming nameless. No one knew that he had only given up on cultivation. He had always been silently working hard in other areas. He was well aware that only in this way could he defeat Wang Pa. Like wisdom, strategy, callous schemes, and his ability to judge and exploit the human heart. In terms of fighting, I might never be able to match you in this lifetime. But in terms of other areas, you're not even worthy of carrying my shoes. I know best what every person cares about, what they want, what thresholds they can't cross, what shadows they can't see. Everyone says that Wang Po's path of the blade is straight. To seek fame and sell straightforwardness, what you care about the most is naturally your reputation. Today, I will use the reputation you want to press down on your blade. What can you do about it? The Tang second master looked at Wang Pa and laughed. Just like usual, his mouth was open, but no sound could be heard. Every word that had come out of his mouth had been mocking and ridiculing Wang Pe. As Wang Pe looked at his face, his desire, his impulse, grew stronger and stronger. But what could he do? He was not a person who sought fame and sold straightforwardness. But his kindness was as weighty as a mountain. If this mountain pressed down, could he really hack it down with one strike? Madame Mu walked out of the hall and raised her head to the sky. Snow was falling from the sky, coming from the clouds. No matter how others looked at it, in her eyes, the snow and the clouds were sheep, white and soft. Wherever her gaze passed, the snow drifted and the clouds moved like a flock of sheep. Mao Qiuyu's expression turned abnormally grave at this sight, his sleeves fluttering in the still air. She drew back her gaze and looked to the side of the hall, revealing a cold smile as she asked, "My younger sister was punished here? Besides the demi-human empress, she also had the identity of the great Western continent's chief princess. Her younger sister was once a prefect of the orthodoxy, Mu Jiushi. Shang Xingzhou's desire to expel Chen Chongsheng from the orthodoxy and push for Mu Jiushi to become the successor to the Pope naturally had a great deal to do with her." Upon hearing this, Mao Qiuyu's expression actually calmed down and he lightly waved his sleeves. A gust of wind swept up the snow in front of the hall, sweeping it into the shadows of the halls and revealing several figures. Daoist Bai Shi, Linghai Zhuang, and Lin, Daoist Siyuan. The 5 strongest prefects of the orthodoxy were all present. And this was the Li Palace. Even if she was a saint, she was not necessarily invincible. And this wasn't even considering the fact that although the Pope was gravely ill, he was still the Pope. Mao Qiuyu sternly asked, "Empress, does Empress truly wish to make an enemy of my orthodoxy? To disagree with Yin is to make an enemy of the orthodoxy?" She calmly asked, "Is Shang not allowed to represent the orthodoxy?" Mao Qiuyu, Linghai Zhuang, and the others did not change their expressions, but their Dao hearts were thoroughly chilled. They knew that if they did not handle this matter properly today, the orthodoxy was highly likely to welcome its greatest internal conflict since the Holy Maiden's departure to the south. Shang Xingzhou was also a legitimate successor of the orthodoxy and also the Pope's senior brother. 1,000 years ago, he had lived in the Li Palace. From a certain perspective, after the Pope's death, he was the person that could best represent the orthodoxy. The meaning of Madame Mu's words was crystal clear. The Li Palace suddenly experienced a blizzard. The snowstorm in the Imperial Palace suddenly became more violent. The western winds swept up bits of snow, slapping against the door to the side of the hall. The door was pushed open, but the blizzard could not enter because Shang Xingzhou had walked out. In order to subdue the pavilion of heavenly secrets and help His Majesty stabilize the court in the shortest time possible, he had stayed in this room for many days. Today he walked out. He was prepared to leave the palace. He wanted to go to the Li Palace. 10 some Taoists of profound cultivation walked out of the blizzard and followed behind him. Chapter 706. Shang Xingzhou did not leave the Imperial Palace. His will was like a torrential flood, about to cover the entire capital and even the entire world, swallowing Chen Chongsheng without trace. At this moment, someone stood up. The Pope was still in the Li Palace. Wang Pe was still by the table. Siyurong was in South Stream Temple. The girls of South Stream Temple had been stopped by Priest Exian and his men in the Orthodox Academy. Tang 36 was in Wenshui, and Zheshio had disappeared. The person who stood out was out of everyone's expectations, but when they thought about it carefully, it was only natural. Yurin stood in the snow, eunuchs and palace maids kneeling around him. For the first time, the young emperor went against the wishes of his teachers and ministers and appeared somewhere between heaven and earth. That was the position he had chosen for himself. The cold wind ruffled his cloak, but it couldn't ruffle his eyebrows and eyes. His expression was still calm and tranquil. No matter how angry the wind and snow were, it was only natural. He looked at his teacher quietly. Shang Xingzhou looked at him quietly. Unlike Chen Chongsheng, Yu Ren was Shang Xingzhou's true successor. Shang Xingzhou's lifelong dream entrusted him. Shang Xingzhou really loved him dearly and was willing to do anything for him. Everything he did was for his own benefit. Yurin was well aware of this, so he was moved, then uneasy, then fearful. These days, he had been learning how to be a wise monarch in the palace. He was silent and fearful. He knew that his teacher would definitely kill his junior brother. If he wanted to become an eternal monarch like Emperor Taizong, there could not be a single flaw in his heart. In other words, there could not be any existence in the world that could shake his will. This was what Shang Xingzhou wanted to ensure. He would not even allow himself to have such influence. Chen Changsheng could do this, so he must die. No one understood. The great Western continent did not understand. White Emperor City did not understand. Wenshui did not understand. The South did not understand. And the Pope did not understand. Only that old temple next to Xining Village understood. On that morning in the Mausoleum of Books, Yurin had watched his junior brother carry the Tianhai, divine empress's body down the mountain. Watched his master walk up the mountain. Watched them brush past each other like strangers and understood. So these days, he was very obedient in the palace, diligently learning how to be a wise ruler. The more uneasy and fearful he was, the more obedient and quiet he was, just like he was in Xining Village's old temple. However, Master still wanted to kill junior brother. In that case, he could only stand out and tell his master that this wouldn't do. As he gazed at Yurin in the snowstorm, Shang Xingzhou's expression grew colder and colder. His will to kill Chen Changsheng even firmer. He had wanted Chen Changsheng dead precisely because of this, and Yurin's appearance was proof of his thoughts. In his view, Chen Changsheng deserved to die even more. How could they stop all of this? How could they change the mind of someone like Shang Xingzhou? Yurin's hand gripped a jade pendant tied to his belt. This jade pendant was made of green jade. Its entire body was translucent, without the slightest impurity. It was extremely valuable. This jade pendant had no fluctuations of qi, so it was not a magical artifact. It was merely a gift that the Qiushan clan head had presented to the new monarch when he had entered the palace a few days ago. This gift was to the liking of the new emperor. When Yurin had received the jade pendant in the hall, he had not shown any strange expression, but his mind had been slightly disturbed. He didn't expect that there would be someone in the world who could guess his worries and uneasiness and even give him a solution. He was keenly aware that during the chaos of Mount Li, that Qiushan Jun, who was equally famous as his junior brother, had faced his father and done something. So when he faced his master, perhaps he could also do the same thing. Shang Xingzhou's gaze pierced through the snow and rested on the jade pendant in Yurin's hand. He knew everything that happened in the palace, so he naturally knew the origins of this jade pendant. He understood what Yurin wanted to express, so he fell silent. The snow continued to fall, and the accumulated snow in the plaza of the imperial palace gradually deepened. The kneeling eunuchs, maids, and tinsome Taoists were like black dots. After some time, Shang Xingzhou finally spoke. Just this once. He looked at Yurin and said, "Just this once." Yurin very seriously nodded his head. Shang Xingzhou continued, "But your majesty, you must understand that this is the capital, not Xining Village's old temple. This is a matter of the world, not a matter between us three master and disciple. This is not because he forgot to boil water, cook, or clean. If you want to take his place, you can take it. I cannot punish him, but there are other people who will act for the heavens, and he will still die." Yurin did not think so. He knew that Madame Mu had gone to the Li Palace, that a supreme expert like Tai Shu was standing guard outside Zhou prison, and that there was also Xiao De, Xiao Zhang, and even the Wenshui Tangs. But he still believed in Chen Changsheng, because Chen Changsheng was not alone. He had companions. Yurin was well aware that, under his influence, his junior brother did not speak much, nor could he be said to be interesting. But in Xining Village, whether he went hunting in the mountains, caught fish in the streams, or went to town to buy vegetables, he would always encounter people who were willing to help him. Those people were hunters, fishermen, all of them people with good intentions. Perhaps it was because the two of them had always had an indelible kindness to this world. The sounds of fighting on the street suddenly vanished. This did not mean that the battle was over, because it was clear in the snow that Chen Changsheng was still standing. Wang Po's fingers were very slender and very steady, especially when he gripped the hilt of his blade. The thin layer of snow fell away, revealing the true appearance of the blade. It was still sheathed, not showing its edge, but there was already a massive difference. Previously, this blade had been quietly placed on the table, but now it was grasped in his hand. With his actions, many things had changed. The Tang's second master's complexion turned abnormally nasty. A hint of surprise flashed through Tai Shu's eyes. The one Shui Tangs had used the words kindness as weighty as a mountain, but it still could not make this person withdraw his blade. Could it be that you dare to attack me? The Tang's second master stared into Wang Po's eyes, his voice even colder than the snow. He represented the one Shui Tangs, represented the old master, represented that mountain. Wang Po stood up and said to him, "I will not attack you." The Tang's second master said nothing, knowing that there was more to come. As expected, "Because you are not worthy," Wang Po replied. From Tanja Temple to the snowy street, from yellow leaves to the snowstorm, in the days since Wang Po had arrived in the capital, his blade had never been sheathed. Everyone knew that he was comprehending the path of the blade, nurturing his edge. His blade was certain to shake the heavens and the earth. Besides an expert of the divine domain, who had the right to endure this blade, when Wang Po said that the Tang's second master was not worthy of this blade, he was not mocking him, but speaking the truth. The truth was the most hurtful. The Tang's second master's complexion turned even nastier, but then he began to laugh. This time, there was a sound to his laughter. He roared with laughter, brimming with derision. His laughter suddenly stopped as he stared at Wang Po and coldly said, "Whether you are not worthy or you do not dare, if you do not use your blade, you will never be able to resolve today's predicament." This was also the truth. If Wang Po did not use his blade, how could he help Qin Changsheng? What happened next was Wang Po's answer. He gripped his blade and swung it at the Tang's second master. It was like a wave of a sleeve, like brushing away dust, like driving away something disgusting from one's eyes. His movement was very light and disdainful. The Tang's second master's pupils constricted. He had not expected that Qin Changsheng would actually attack him. Circulating his true essence, he stepped on the snow, transforming into several golden blurs that dodged in all directions. In the last few years, he had not been as diligent in his cultivation as he had been in the past, but he still possessed astonishing talent and was a direct descendant of the Tang clan. His strength still existed, and his cultivation was rather high. He used the myriad golden leaves movement technique of the one Shui Tangs. In a flash, one could reach the other shore. This was a supreme technique that not even Tang 36 had been able to learn. Although it was not as marvelous as the Yesher step, it was still very difficult to see through. Countless fragments of snow flew as Wang Po's blade descended. The iron saber simply fell, but contained endless changes. In the end, nothing changed. The blade drew out a straight line in the wind and snow, simple and clear. The front of the line accurately struck one of the blurs in the golden light. There was a crisp slap, like the sound of a slap to the face. The Tang's second master heavily fell onto the snowy street. The right side of his face was red and swollen, blood seeping from the corner of his lips, and his eyes brimming with disbelief. After a few moments, he came to his senses and furiously yelled at Wang Po, "You actually dare to hit me?" Wang Po looked back at him, saying nothing. Several teeth mixed with blood were spat out of the Tang second master's mouth. He used a trembling finger to touch his face. Even more furious, he shrieked, "You actually dare to hit my face? When I first saw you in Wenshui, I already wanted to hit you." Wang Po paused for a moment, then continued, "And I especially wanted to hit your face." Chapter 707. The Tang second master had a handsome face, but when he habitually gave a silent laugh, it would always seem exaggerated and comical. Wang Po did not like this sort of laugh, because it felt very obscure, as if it concealed many emotions that he could not see through. Many years ago, when he first came to Wenshui and saw the other party in the Tang clan's ancestral hall, he had already disliked him. At the time, The Tang's second master had seen the ragged Wang Pe, his eyes turning and his silent smile, like he was looking at a stray dog on the street or a poor relative seeking shelter from the rain under a fence. At that time, when Wang Pe looked at his face, he felt an extremely strong impulse, or rather, a desire. He wanted to wave the blade in his hand and smash the Tang, second master's face, and smile into pulp. But out of respect for the Tang old master, out of respect for his job as an accountant, he did not act. Thus, this desire had always remained in the depths of his heart. Even after so many years, it had not weakened in the slightest. Until today, when he saw the Tang's second master push open the door of tea house on the side of the street, that handsome face revealing a shameless and silent smile, Wang Pe could no longer suppress his impulse. Kindness truly was as weighty as a mountain, but his blade had truly been thirsty for far too long. Thus, he swung his blade. In Wenshui, when they were still young, he had not been able to shatter the Tang's second master's mocking smile because he did not want to fight, so he had been enduring. Now that he did not want to endure, he wanted to fight, so he could naturally strike. The Tang clan's secret movement technique, myriad golden leaves, truly was difficult to trace and extremely profound, but in Wang Pe's eyes, it was nothing. In the second month in Wenshui, the Tang old master had gone to the accountant's room and personally taught him this movement technique. He did not need to use his blade. With the blade still sheathed, he could beat the Tang's second master until he could not speak. The Tang's second master sat in the snow, his face covered in blood, his eyes brimming with an indescribable hatred. My Tang clan wants to protect your life. Since you don't care and want to die, then go die. Wang Pe stood up, gripped his blade once more, and had even struck him. This naturally meant that he had refused the Wenshui Tang clan's request. He wanted to kill Zhou Tong together with Chun Changsheng, so he had to directly battle Tai Shu. It hasn't even started. How can you say that you're courting death? Wang Pe looked at the Tang's second master and said, "This is where you are inferior to me, Sun Mei and Xiao Zhang." The beginning of this age of wildflowers bore some remarkable names. Wang Pe, Sun Mei, Xiao Zhang, Liang Wang's son. Xiao. Very few people remembered that at the very beginning, there was a name with the surname Tang on the list. They're the same as you. Whether it is talent or opportunity, they are inferior to me. They have never been able to catch up to me, but they have never given up. They have always been chasing after me. Wang Pe's gaze fell on the end of the snowy street. He knew that Xiao was there, and that Xiao Zhang might also appear. Liang Wang's son had taken refuge in Xuanyang City, and Sun Mei would no longer appear. Cultivation and battle are the same thing. Victory and defeat cannot be determined until the very last moment. In the end, Sun Mei caught up to me in the mausoleum of books, and Xiao Zhang still had a chance. Wang Pe drew back his gaze and turned to the Tang, second master. And when you fought with me in Wenshui, you felt that you would never be my match. So you turned to guessing at the human heart and learning strategies that was admitting defeat. From that moment, you became a piece of trash, no longer able to defeat me, no longer inferior to me for the rest of your life. The Tang's second master froze, his expression somewhat perplexed. Wang Pe's voice was very calm, devoid of any deliberate mockery. He was only making a cool-headed and objective judgment. But everyone could hear a kind of feeling from these words, a feeling of superiority, because his words were brimming with the word invincible. This was an expert. Wang Pe might have a higher level of cultivation than those equally famous opponents of the world, but he would never be able to crush them, like Xiao Zhang and Liang Wang's son. But in a true battle, he had never been defeated, and he would often crush his opponents and obtain victory. It was because in terms of vigor, willpower, mentality, and understanding of the world in his own heart, he was far superior. As he gazed at Wang Pe, Tai Shu revealed an expression of admiration and sorrow. Each generation had its own geniuses, each dominating the world for several decades. But who could possess such a great advantage over experts of the same generation? Such boldness? And this wasn't even mentioning the fact that these several decades had been the age of blooming wildflowers. Countless cultivators brimming with geniuses had sprung up like bamboo after the rain. Yet Wang Pa had relied on his blade to suppress the experts and geniuses of this generation to the point that they found it difficult to breathe and difficult to stand out. Other than Zhou Dufu, no one else had ever done something like this. Admiration and sorrow ultimately caused the entire world to become wary and uneasy. Zhu Luo did not hesitate to die to have Wang Pa die. This was the principle. Since Wang Pa was not prepared to listen to the Wenshui Tang's suggestion, he would naturally kill Wang Pa. He was even somewhat anxious to kill Wang Pa, just like that day in Tanja Temple, because right now, Bi Yang Hong or Wu Qiongbai still had the ability to kill Wang Pa. If they did not hurry, if another few days passed, if another 2 snowfalls occurred, what would they do? In another few days, if another 2 snowfalls occurred, perhaps they would not be able to kill Wang Pa. This sort of understanding was very unsettling. Even the starry sky that enveloped the mortal world would tremble in unease. At that time, would a second Zhou Dufu really appear in the mortal world? No, even if it was just a thought, this was not something that could be permitted. Taishu looked at Wang Pa and said, "My apologies." Whether it was the oath to the starry sky, the strong bullying the weak, the old bullying the young, or saying that a future titan of a human race would fall, they all deserved his apology. Wang Pa did not respond to his apology, because in his view, he was not certain that he would lose today's battle. Yes, the entire continent did not believe that he could win, not even if he was Wang Pa. But he himself did not think this way, because the night rain in Xuanyang City was very fast. The fallen leaves in Tanja Temple were very beautiful, and the layers of willows by the Luo River were like mist, but they could no longer obscure his eyes. Wang Pa raised his blade and pointed it at Tai Shu, his movements steady and simple. But the blade began to tremble. It was not fear, but a desire to fight, a courage to challenge. From Tanja Temple to the snowy street, it had been many days since he had last used his blade. Everyone knew that the next blade would assuredly be the strongest blade he would use in his entire life. There was only a table between him and Tai Shu. Logically speaking, if he raised his blade, it should have touched Tai Shu's clothes. But when he raised his blade, it was like a great river separated them, so far away that the blade simply could not touch Tai Shu's clothes. Was this vast distance the distance between the divine domain and the mortal world? Could his blade ignore this distance and fall into the starry sky? No one knew. When Wang Pa did not use his blade, there were limitless possibilities. When he used his blade, the limitless possibilities would collapse into a single truth. The entire world was waiting to see that single truth. No one knew who would be unable to endure this truth in the next moment. At this moment, Tai Shu made a choice. This choice was very simple, but it represented several centuries of experience. He chose to strike. He would not let Wang Pa use his blade. He decided not to give Wang Pa the chance to use his blade. No matter what the truth of this blade was, he did not want to see it again, because he had always wanted to kill Wang Pa, not receive Wang Po's blade. When he decided to strike first, no one could be faster than him, unless his opponent was also an expert of the divine domain, or a divine sanctified Su Yurong or Nek. Wang Pa was not. Thus, Tai Shu's hand first fell on Wang Po's blade. At this time, Wang Po's blade still had not been unsheathed. The snow drifting down from the sky suddenly froze. A peal of thunder resounded through the long street. The buildings on both sides of the street were completely pulverized. The countless snowflakes that had been frozen in the air were also pulverized. The smoke vanished. There was not a single person on the street. Wang Pa and Tai Shu had vanished. But the peal of thunder had not disappeared. It continued to rise and fall in spirals. Finally, it fell on the Luo River. Chapter 708. This year's winter in the capital was much colder than in previous years. It was still early winter, but the Luo River was already frozen, especially on the surface of the river outside the canal gate. The ice was thick enough for a person to stand on. At this moment, Wang Pa and Tai Shu were standing on the icy surface of the Luo River. Between the two of them, There was a breach that was more than 100 feet wide. The river water was rippling inside, and it was incomparably dark like an abyss. The thunder that resounded through Jingdo rose from the snowy street and ultimately landed there. With his hands behind his back, Tai Shu expressionlessly looked at his opponent as if he had never made a move before. Wang Po's blade was held horizontally in front of him. His clothes had been torn in many places, especially his sleeves, collar, and sleeves. It was as if they had been blown by a fierce gale for decades. Blood could be faintly seen in those lacerations. It was obvious that he had been injured in a single exchange, and his injuries did not look light at all. However, Tai Shu's eyes did not relax, nor was there any contempt or disdain. On the contrary, they became even more serious and even somewhat vigilant. Wang Po still had not unsheathed his blade. Several clear finger marks could be seen on the sheath, and it was even clearly bent. He still did not draw his saber. An expert of the divine domain had taken the initiative to attack, but he still had not unsheathed his blade. This was a very puzzling and shocking matter. What was even more shocking was that he was still alive, even though his injuries were not light. Back when he was fighting Zhu Luo on the rainy street of Xuanyang City, Wang Po had unhesitatingly used his strongest blade technique, cleaving out countless cracks in space. Only then could he barely keep Zhu Luo's moonlight at the other end of the street. Today, when facing Tai Shu on the snowy streets of the capital, he had not even unsheathed his blade, yet he was able to receive one of Tai Shu's blows. Tai Shu and Zhu Luo were both storms of the 8 directions, and in terms of combat prowess, he was even slightly above Zhu Luo. This could only mean that in these 2 short years, Wang Po's blade had become much stronger than it had been in Xuanyang City. Tai Shu's face was expressionless, but his mood was somewhat complicated. Even without using his saber, Xiao Chan was able to receive his powerful attack head-on and was still standing. He was indeed worthy of being the strongest among the younger generation. He did not know how much progress Wang Po had made in these past 2 years, only that he was more powerful than the rumors said, much more powerful than he had been in Tanja Temple. This rate of improvement was simply unimaginable. He could no longer judge how far Wang Po was from that threshold. It was still the same sentence. Wang Po still did not draw his blade. "What saber is this?" Tai Shu suddenly asked. Since Wang Po had not unsheathed his blade, what was he asking? If there were spectators on the 2 shores of the Luo River, they would certainly not understand these words. Wang Po understood. Saber was just one word, but it could have many meanings. The blade itself, the moves of the saber, the trajectory of the knife, the path of the blade. He did not draw his blade, but he had already made his move. This move was the horizontal blade. Wang Po's saber Dao and the mysteries of this move were all contained in this horizontal slash. As such, he was able to receive Tai Shu's attack without using his saber. Tai Shu had never seen such a marvelous saber technique. What he wanted to know was the name and origin of this move. "I don't know," Wang Po said. "He didn't tell me." There was still some distance between the Wei Estate and the alley of the Northern Military Department, and they would have to cross the Luo River. On their way here, Wang Po and Chen Changsheng had stopped by the banks of the Luo River to chat. The banks of the Luo River had cold willows, embankments, ice on the surface of the river, and stories. When they had first met in Xuanyang City, they had not spoken much. Now that they had reunited in the capital, they knew that they would soon separate again, perhaps even for eternity, so they had chatted a great deal. They had chatted about Wang Jitz's past, about the bridge of helplessness, and about each other's past. Seeing the metal blade at his waist, Chen Changsheng recalled the mausoleum in the Garden of Zhou, as well as the master of the mausoleum and the blade style drawn on the black coffin. He had an idea. That blade style could not be passed down verbally, so he could only tell Wang Po what he had comprehended from it. Wang Po did not express his thanks, nor did he refuse, but it was clear that he was not very interested, even though he clearly knew that it was the strongest blade style in all of history, because he had his own path of the blade, and his path of the blade was the exact opposite of Zhou Dufu's severing blade. Chen Changsheng continued. In the wilderness, he had learned the sword from Su Li. Many cultivators of the world were very interested in this matter, or perhaps very jealous. Wangpa was not jealous because he did not like Su Li, but it was still Su Li's sword, so he was rather interested. Especially when Chun Chongqing mentioned that the third sword that he had learned from Su Li was, in reality, also not something that Su Li had learned. He said to Chun Chongqing that he wanted to learn this sword. Chun Chongqing said yes. They stood under the cold willows by the Luo River and spoke a few words. And then Wangpa learned that sword. He was the third person in the world to learn this sword, and he had only used a few words to learn it. Once Su Li learned of this, he wondered what sort of mood he would have. That sword was called the Stupid Sword. To learn this sword, one needed to temper it 1,000 times, needed to endlessly repeat it monotonously and impatiently. What this sword required was not talent, but a persistence that bordered on stupidity. So Su Li could not learn this sword because he was too smart. Logically speaking, no matter how astonishing Wangpa's talent was, he should not have been able to learn this sword in such a short amount of time. Interestingly, Wangpa's method of practicing the blade was very similar to Chun Chongqing's method of practicing the sword. In the past few decades, he had brandished the metal blade far too many times. Now, he only needed to use the sword as a blade to display this sword, or perhaps this blade. Thus, Taishu's terrifying hands were not able to break through his sheath. You lost because you were wrong. Wangpa looked at Taishu and said, "You should not have stopped me from unsheathing my blade." Taishu was quiet for a few moments, then asked, "What do you mean?" Wangpa replied, "Only when the blade is hidden in its sheath can it have all sorts of transformations and limitless possibilities. Although it is not the strongest, it is the hardest to break." Taishu asked, "Do I really have to foolishly wait for you to unsheath your blade?" Wangpa replied, "If you do not dare to see the truth of this blade, then the truth will often not be as you wish it to be." Taishu's expression was indifferent. His hands clenched behind his back, countless rays of cold light and sharpness seeping out from his fingers, noiselessly slicing apart the wind and snow. This scene was a sign of his current mood, because Wangpa had guessed his thoughts. So could he have predicted the correct conclusion? His gaze fell on Wangpa's blade, and he taunted, "Then you can show me the truth, if you can still do it." Wangpa's blade was the truth. From the moment he had left Scholartree Manor, the entire world had been waiting with bated breath. But the blade was already bent beyond repair. So how could he pull it out of its sheath? As he spoke, Taishu arrived in front of Wangpa, his two hands flying through the air. A fierce gale blew over the Luo River, obscuring one's eyes with snowflakes. One could faintly make out the silhouettes of 10 fingers, shaking the snow as they pierced through the air, like a massive tree extending its branches, like a massive flower blooming. Countless unyielding chi suffused with a metallic aura descended upon Wangpa as those branches extended and petals unfurled. The iron tree bloomed. This was a Taoist technique of the divine domain, a power above the starry sky. No matter how well this blade could defend, it could not conceal the entire starry sky. If Wangpa did not unsheath his blade, he would assuredly die. So Wangpa finally unsheathed his blade. The blade was still in its sheath, but its intent had already risen. An extremely swift and fierce blade Tao that seemed especially simple and sincere soared into the sky. The wind and snow suddenly sped up, countless cracks appearing on the frozen surface of the Luo River. As he sensed this blade intent, Taishu's expression instantly chilled, his eyes bursting with killing intent. Only he could see that Wangpa was using this blade to break through. Chapter 709. From Tianliang to Wenshui, from the south to the land of demons, from Xuanyang City to the capital, from Tanja Temple to the snowy street. Wangpa had been preparing his blade this entire time. He had been accumulating this blade for many years precisely so that he could cleave open a path between the starry sky and the earth, sever that threshold. Taishu could clearly sense that after Wangpa's blade intent reached its peak, it did not stop there. Rather, it continued to rise, and it was faintly undergoing some inexplicable transformation. Wangpa had long ago reached the peak of star condensation. If he continued to rise, what else could it be but breaking through? A harsh howl resounded over the two shores of the Luo River. Taishu's figure vanished from Wang Po's eyes, not truly vanished. Between the snowy clouds and the icy surface, his figure could be seen everywhere. The chi of the world and the laws and principles concealed within were affected by his figure. That invisible flower with a metallic luster descended from the heavens and enveloped Wang Po's blade. He used the world to bind Wang Po's blade intent. The flower that bloomed between the heavens and the earth was his figure that had appeared out of rage, as well as those two hands suffused with a cold light. When the iron tree bloomed, it bloomed into 10,000 flowers. Each petal represented the laws and principles of the world and was abnormally powerful. If Wang Po wanted to survive, he had to either see through these laws and principles or break through them head-on. He had only cultivated for a few decades, so how could he see through the methods that Taishu had cultivated over the endless years? No matter how much his blade intent increased, it was impossible for him to cleave through Taishu's attack that contained the laws and principles of the world. So what should he do? Wang Po's blade intent rose sharply and burst out of his body. With a light sound, his left arm was severed and sent flying into the sky. A stream of blood appeared in this monotonous world that had no other color besides snowy white. At this moment, the clouds and dancing snow in the sky were painted with a gorgeous color. The sky was covered in blood, a ghastly sight. It was like flowing lava, like rotten plum blossoms, burning everything clean, polluting everything. In this blood, there was an chi that inspired extreme fear and reverence. From someplace in the sky came a furious roar of disbelief. It was Taishu's voice. From the moment Wang Po severed his arm was his blade, his blood his Tao. So what sort of blade intent did he use? Why was this saber intent so powerful and terrifying that it could easily break through the laws and principles of heaven and earth? If the Pope or Shang Xingzhou were here, they might have been able to understand. This blade intent was called burning the world, and it was Zhou Dufu's having blade technique. At the end of cultivation, different paths often led to the same destination. However, the saber intent of the having saber that Wang Po used now had nothing to do with this saying. Previously, by the banks of the Luo River, Chun Changsheng had explained his understanding of the having blade to him, but he had only casually listened and did not care. However, could he really not care? Of course not. Zhou Dufu was publicly recognized as the strongest under the starry sky, and he used a blade. After Zhou Dufu, Wang Po was recognized by the world as the strongest expert in the path of the saber. He also used the saber. Whether he admitted it or not, whether he resisted it or not, Zhou Dufu's path of the blade had always affected his cultivation. As long as this name existed, as long as the having blade existed, this influence would always exist. He knew very well that if he were to use the having blade's blade intent today, even if he could temporarily break through Taishu's attack of the laws and logos of heaven and earth, it would certainly greatly affect his cultivation of the path of the blade in the future. However, he still chopped down with his blade. If it was only inheritance, this blade would still not have been enough to chop through Taishu's flower. However, he first chopped down on himself. This blade of his came from Zhou Dufu, but what he chopped down was the influence that Zhou Dufu had on him and all those who study the blade in the future. This was not inheritance, nor was it inheritance. It was acceptance and then abandonment. There was no one in the world who could do this. Even if he was Wang Po, he would still need to sever his own arm. However, as his arm flew into the sky, all the fog in his heart was driven away. The shadows vanished, and his eyes became clear and bright. Then, his blade chopped down at the flower that Taishu had bloomed. As a result, the sky was filled with lava and the flower fell like mud. Wang Po's Tao heart was unprecedentedly calm. The blood that sprayed in all directions was blazing hot, melting the snow in the air and the ice on the river. His blade, carrying his blood, broke through the flower petals that represented the laws of the world and arrived in front of Taishu. The blade was still not unsheathed, but its intent had already pierced through the world. That terrifying aura of destruction and destruction, that resolute and cold chi, had already vanished without a trace. Only he remained, like a snowy mountain, like a green pine, unshakable. If his blade had already been unsheathed, perhaps he really might have been able to defeat Tai Shu. Fortunately, his blade was still not unsheathed. Tai Shu knew that this was a chance he had to grasp. In today's battle on the Luo River, the talent and daring Wang Pa had displayed had truly surpassed his imagination and left him abnormally shocked. But even though Wang Pa had disbelievingly broken through that threshold, Tai Shu still firmly believed that he would easily obtain victory in the end, because he had long since seen through Wang Po's problem. Wang Pa had hidden his blade for too long. There was enough time and enough momentum. However, it would often bring about new problems that you didn't even think about. For example, his blade was still in its sheath, and the sheath was already bent. If he wanted to unsheath his blade, it would be somewhat more troublesome and slower than before. Even if it was just a flash of lightning, it would be enough to change the outcome of this battle. With a cold howl, Tai Shu's figure appeared above the Luo River. Amidst the myriad flowers, he slapped his palm at Wang Po's head. It was just like it had been at the very beginning. Wang Po seemed not to know that his blade was still in its sheath. He continued to swing his blade, his expression calm, even somewhat wooden. Suddenly, an extremely soft sound resounded through the world. It was a light clap. It also sounded like the yellow leaves of Tanja Temple being blown by the wind, or like the snow on a long street being stepped on by someone. No, it seemed like something had broken. It was the ice that had been melted and thinned by the heat, the willows by the embankment severed by the shock waves. It was the breaking of a silver vase, the arrival of a magnificent army. It was the breaking of the ice, the feeling of spring filling the mountains. It was the breaking of a realm. It was the breaking of Wang Pa. Wang Pa had broken through. The blade broke through its sheath and slashed at Tai Shu. This was naturally the most powerful blade Wang Pa had ever used in his life. The world had to respond to this to express its respect. The snow falling from the clouds suddenly stopped. Countless cracks appeared on the ice on the surface of the Luo River, transforming into several thousand thick ice floes. These ice floes constantly rose up and then fell back down, as if some violent beast was concealed beneath them. In truth, the waters of the river had been disturbed by the qi of the world and were incessantly surging. After some time, everything fell silent once more. Wang Pa gripped his blade and gazed tinsome li into the distance. His severed arm was nowhere to be seen. His body was covered in blood, and his face was pale, but his eyes were extremely serene. Tinsome li away, Tai Shu stood on the ice. He seemed to want to say something, but in the end, he only shook his head. He fell backwards into the river filled with chunks of ice and withered willows, and died. Chapter 710. Chunks of ice floated in the river. Tai Shu floated among them, his eyes open, already dead. His eyes reflected the gloomy sky, just like the chunks of ice around him and the surface of the water. There was a wound on his abdomen, extremely straight and deep. It had directly severed his ethereal palace and all his acupoints, severing his life. From this wound, one could see the blade Wang Pa had just struck. His blade was still the same as before, but it had faintly undergone many transformations, the meaning of his cultivation even more profound. In the moment the metal blade left its sheath, he had successfully broken through. The prerequisite for this was that he had removed the shadow that Zhou Dufu had cast on his heart. When faced with the mountain in front of them, some people would choose to take a detour, some would choose to retreat, and some would choose to climb. Wang Pa had always been advancing towards that mountain. The peak had always been right before his eyes, but he had never been able to approach it. Only in that moment, just now, did he destroy his inner demons and establish his own path of the blade. It was not unjust that Tai Shu had died in his battle to establish his Tao, but he had just broken through and his reserves were not sufficient. To slay an expert of the divine domain, he had to pay an enormous price. He had lost an arm, and an injury that was even more terrifying than losing an arm was constantly invading his meridians and mind in his body. The cold winter wind blew through the willows on the two shores of the Luo River, gently blowing away the chunks of ice on the water and everything within them. Although the wind was cold, it was not actually very strong. However, Taishu's corpse within the chunks of ice was carried away by the wind into a puff of smoke and vanished. Soon after, the wind ruffled Wang Po's clothes, widening those tears. Blood instantly gushed out like a waterfall. Countless faintly discernible strands of qi followed the blood and left his body. Wang Po's face was bloodless, even whiter than the snow on the river embankment. His body had become incomparably heavy, devoid of strength. He walked towards the shore. The river water, mixed with the chunks of ice, seemed to have become much more viscous, making it very difficult to walk through. A straight line of blood appeared in the river and then spread to the two sides. The edges were frozen, transforming into something like blood coral. He didn't know where he should go, but seeing that the eastern shore of the Luo River was right in front of him, he walked towards it. He was used to walking forward, but this time he seemed to have made the wrong choice. The heavy willows were blown by the wind, and many figures appeared. The first to reach the Luo River was the Tang's second master. Behind him were several hundred cavalry of the Imperial Guard and two divine generals of the Great Zhou. His face was full of tiny wounds, and he looked very miserable. This was the injury that Wang Po and Taishu had suffered when they first exchanged blows on the snowy street. As he gazed at Wang Po and the Luo River, the shock and anger in his eyes gradually disappeared, replaced by indifference. Then, he silently laughed. His smile contained indescribable mockery, contempt, and pity. Yes, you have successfully broken through and become an expert of the divine domain revered by the world. However, in the next moment, you will die. What a sad fact. What a story to celebrate. The Tang's second master's smile faded as he raised his right hand and expressionlessly waved it. Several hundred arrows, shining with dazzling light, left the shore of the Luo River and landed in the center of the river. The Li Palace was silent, the atmosphere extremely tense. The snow on the eaves silently melted, but before it could fall, it turned into beads of ice in the air. Time slowly passed, but no one appeared. Madame Mu gazed at the snowy clouds in the sky and slightly arched her brows in surprise. Who had left Shangxingzhou in the Imperial Palace? And who had made such a ruckus on the streets of the capital? Taishu. No, if it were just him, the thunder would not have been so bright. The thunder ultimately landed on the Luo River. The laws of the world above the Luo River began to change. An invisible flower descended from the sky. A blade intent soared into the sky. Madame Mu was finally moved. Wang Po had broken through. Taishu was dead. This shocked her, and then she fell silent, and then she shivered. The words that Zhu Luo had said in the mausoleum of books before his death were not only for Shangxingzhou to hear, but also for the two of them to hear. If it was any other time, she would have personally killed Wang Po. But at this moment, she needed to be in the Li Palace, herding the snowy clouds in the sky and temporarily resist the will of the orthodoxy, so she could not leave. Fortunately, she could clearly sense that after Wang Po defeated Taishu, he no longer had the strength to fight. In the capital, he could not fight, which meant death. If he died, would Qin Changsheng still be alive? All around him were assassins, killers, and experts of profound cultivation. Xiao stood before him. Qin Changsheng was not surprised by the current situation. He knew that his master wanted to kill him, had always known. It was related to the position of Pope, but the more important reason was something else. The relationship between him and his senior brother was too close. He had never mentioned this to anyone, but that did not mean that he was unaware. He had always believed that his master would choose the day his martial uncle the Pope returned to the Sea of Stars. So before that day came, he had to finish what he had to do. Under the yellow leaves, he had gone to New North Bridge and exhausted all his efforts to make arrangements for the little black dragon's escape in 2 years. Under the blizzard, he had come to the alley of the Northern Military Department to kill Zhou Tong. He had not expected that his master would so eagerly want him to die. Perhaps it would be today. Yes, no sound could be heard from the long street. It would be today. There was still one last leaf left in the bare branches of the crabapple tree. As the assassin crashed into the wall, the leaf also fell, noiselessly landing on the snow in front of that pair of leather boots. Qin Changxing's gaze moved up, resting on Xiaoda's face. This unparalleled expert of the younger generation of demi-humans had naturally appeared in the alley of the Northern Military Department on the orders of White Emperor City. At the very least, he had obtained the tacit approval of that saint couple. In these past 2 years, many gifts, greetings, and honors had come from White Emperor City to the Orthodox Academy. Now that he thought about it, none of it had any meaning. He did not ask for reasons or reasons, because in the matters of the world, all reasons and reasons, when investigated, would often end with the word benefit. The White Emperor couple had to consider the benefit of the demi-human race. Even if they had once had a good impression of Qin Changsheng, it would not affect their cold judgment. Xiao had to consider his own benefit, and he had no good impression of Qin Changsheng. For the sake of the 800 li of the Red River and Luoluo, he was very willing to let Qin Changsheng die. I must ask you to die, Xiao earnestly said to him, and then he punched. This fist seemed simple, but it was actually incomparably terrifying. The vigorous, true essence of the demi-humans carried the chi of the world as it arrived in front of him. At the same time, tinsome star condensation assassins thrust their swords out of the snowstorm, sealing off all his paths of retreat. If Qin Changsheng forcefully retreated, he would have to simultaneously confront these tinsome, terrifying swords, and he would also have to confront the even more terrifying Xiaoda's fist. If he chose to advance, he would assuredly be stopped by Xiaoda's fist, and those tinsome sword would explode with their most terrifying might. It seemed like no matter what he chose, he would die. Perhaps it was for this reason that he chose to advance. Both forward and backward meant death, so why not advance? Of course, he had to advance. He broke through the snowstorm and thrust his sword forward. His movements were even faster than Xiaoda's fist. His sword intent was like a mountain fire. No, it should be the heavenly fire. The fire descending from the heavens was lightning. His sword was like a bolt of lightning, stabbing into Xiaoda's body. At the same time, Xiaoda's fist also reached his body. I went to the hospital at noon and returned home at 9 in the evening. I was so tired that I didn't want to write anymore, but as I wrote, I gained more strength. I wrote this chapter, forward, forward. I thought of how Su Lu was constantly moving forward on the flying ship, and then the accompaniment in my head was all a march, especially majestic and powerful.